Introductions. I'm going to go around the table. Chris, do you want to kick off?
Good morning everyone, Chris Moser, Chief People Officer.
Ellen Loudon, Vice Chair of the Healthcare Partnership.
Fiona Lemons, Associate Medical Director.
John Llewellyn, Chief Digital and Information Officer.
Good morning, Mark Palethorpe, the NHS Place Director for St Helens and the Executive Director of People, which is Children's, Adults and Public Health in the Council.
Hi, Alison Lee. I'm the NHS Director for Knowsley.
Warren Eskdale, Chief Executive for Voluntary Sector North West and the Voluntary Sector Rep on the board.
Kate Littles, Deputy CEO of Community and Voluntary Services Cheshire East.
Good morning all, I'm Adam Irvin. I'm a community pharmacist and a partner member on the board.
Good morning, I'm Claire Watson. I'm the Assistant Chief Executive at the ICB.
Good morning, Rowan Pritchard-Jones, your Medical Director for NHS Cheshire and Merseyside.
Hi, I'm Claire Wilson. I'm the Finance Director for the ICB.
Good morning, Graham Irwin, Chief Executive for NHS Cheshire and Merseyside.
Chris, go ahead.
Morning, everybody. I'm Chris Douglas, Director of Nursing and Care.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Lewis. I'm Chief Executive of Liverpool City Council and a partner board member on behalf of local government.
Good morning, I'm Neil Large, non-exec.
I'm Naomi Rankin. I'm a GP and primary care partner member.
Good morning, I'm Mar. I'm representing the acute provider sector. I'm the Chief Executive of Mersey and West Lancashire Teaching Hospitals and I lead the Cheshire and Merseyside Acute and Specialist Trust Provider Collaborative.
Good morning, Tony Foyne, Executive Director.
Good morning, Louise Barry, Chief Executive Health Watch Cheshire, here for the 9 Health Watch across Cheshire and Merseyside.
Good morning, Anthony Middleton, Director of Performance and Planning.
Hello, I'm Hilary Garrett, Non-Executive Director of the ICB.
Hello, Steve Broomer, Chief Executive of Warrington Borough Council and partner member for local government.
Good morning, I'm Trish Fennis, newly appointed Chief Exec of Merseycare and representing mental health, learning disability and community services.
Hello, Ruth Hussey, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Ian Ashworth, Director of Population Health.
Morning, Louise Robson, Chair of Health Innovation for North West Coast.
Thank you. Apologies were being noted in the minutes, and I can confirm that we've got quoracy. Are there any declarations of interest not already made on matters relating to the agenda? No. I can't see everybody, so make sure you you wave. Right, let's move to the report of the chair. And I'm really delighted to make the announcement about the appointment of partner members' positions to this board. We've just heard from Trish. Welcome, Trish. Thank you very much for putting your hand up and volunteering to support this board. But of course, I'd also like to formally welcome Andrew Lewis, who's our second local authority partner member, and Warren. Warren's over here, and Warren, who's our member on behalf of the Voluntary and Faith sector. So that's me done. Any questions on that report? No, thank you. Let's move to the experience and achievement story. And I think we've got Rowan. I'm looking for Rowan. Where is he? Yes, to introduce this.
There are 7 parts of England where you can have a targeted lung health check. If you're between 55 and 74 years old and you've ever smoked, you're eligible to go and have a CT scan. It won't surprise colleagues and members of the public to know that our most vulnerable communities when it comes to lung cancer are from our deprived areas. Health inequalities and tackling those is absolutely at the core of our mission. And setting out to find those high-risk patients, to find them early, to intervene to give them the best possible outcome is something that we hold very, very dear. I'm delighted to introduce our story this morning that takes you on that journey. Thank you, Chair.
Hi, I'm Michelle.
Hiya, and my name's Paula, and we're nurses in the Cheshire and Merseyside Lung Health Check team.
Lung health checks are for people aged 55 to 74 who have smoked in the past or still smoke. They are a free NHS lung health test that check for lung disease or lung cancers.
We do the checks as quickly as we can, and they can hopefully put your mind at rest that there's nothing wrong with you.
The tests are rolling out across Cheshire and Merseyside. If you're between the ages of 55 and 74 and have smoked in the past or still smoke and have a GP practice you're registered with, you will get a text or an appointment letter in the post.
So your appointment will be a telephone consultation with one of our nurses. They'll ask you some questions about your past medical history and also about your family history and whether there's been any cancer in the family. They'll ask you whether you're a current smoker or a past smoker.
We don't give you a hard time about it though, but if you do smoke and wish to stop, we can point you in the right direction.
So we do offer some people a scan. It's a type of x-ray that has a closer look at your lungs. It's done really quickly and it'll be done in one of our mobile units that comes to your local area.
Most people are totally fine, but if you do have any problems, including lung cancer, you may not have any symptoms at first. It's much better to find lung cancer early so we can treat it quicker.
So if you do get an appointment from us, please don't ignore it. If you do have any questions, just give the service a call and we'd be happy to have a chat anytime.
Great work, Rowan.
Yeah. So, does it work? We know that cancer outcomes are, by and large, worse for our patients who come from a deprived background. This programme has bucked that trend. We've now shown that we are finding a far earlier detection of cancers, where they are more treatable, with a better outcome and a less difficult treatment journey for the patient. And for the first time, we are showing that we are finding those cancers predominantly in those patients from deprived backgrounds. With a mission to tackle health inequalities, this is a shining light that it can be done. It's often said that there are people who are hard to reach. The reality is there are people that we need to work differently and we need to work harder to make sure that we reach them. This project has brought that to life and is making the difference that these patients deserve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I could move on to the report of the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I won't go through all of the reports, but happy to take questions as is appropriate. I do just want to highlight one or two issues, though. So firstly, people will have seen, and they don't need me to talk about it here, but the publication of the Darcy review. But it's important to set that in some context. It was a piece of work that the government asked for, which is kind of a state of the NHS right now, to inform the publication of the government's 10-year plan for the NHS. As it stands, my expectation is the government are going to publish their 10-year plan for the NHS probably in April of next year. And at some point in time, they will, I believe, hold engagement events in every single ICB footprint of the country. So there will be an opportunity for us to co-produce with the national team at least one or more engagement events early in the new year where we can make sure that people have inputted to the things that matter and the response and the things that we would like to see within the government's 10-year plan for the NHS. Secondly, I just wanted to highlight the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister had written out to those parts of the country that were not part of a government devolution deal. For us, that includes the area that covers East Cheshire, West Cheshire and Warrington. And I just wanted to inform the board that I have written to the chief executives of those three councils to say we will do everything and anything we can to support them in their bid to government to be part of that devolution deal. There are many opportunities that will flow from that through the interface between health and employment, the interface between health and housing, and certainly the more powers that the government are prepared to devolve to local areas, the more opportunity we will have to progress and forward issues that come under the Altogether Fairer agenda and tackling some of those upstream impacts that determine people's health status. So we'll keep you informed as that work goes forward, but we will work closely with those councils and support them as we can. I just wanted to highlight one more point, and it does link back in some way to a question that we were asked in the AGM. And that's the reference that I'm making to the Crown Street site within this report at item number 15. Anthony was asked the question about tackling waiting lists. Well, in anticipation of what we think the government will demand on us, we have already been doing some substantial modelling of our waiting lists, and I am already really confident that, for instance, in the areas of orthopaedics, we will comfortably hit whatever government target they set for us to return those waiting lists to pre-pandemic levels. One of the areas, however, that we are less confident about at the moment is our ability to hit any target they might set us in the area of gynecology. And our gynecology waiting lists are currently too long. And this is one of the reasons that we have gone out and secured investment through the Targeted Investment Fund to open up more procedure rooms and treatment facilities at the Crown Street site so that we can tackle this. I think it is also really important just to remind people that we are going to continue to invest in the Crown Street site because we absolutely see that as a fundamental part of the NHS and fundamental to the delivery of women's services for both Liverpool and beyond. I'm not going to say any more this morning, Chair, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Graham. Any questions, Chief Exec? Ruth?
Thank you. Thanks for the comprehensive report. I just wanted to sort of indirectly came up at the AGM, but the Digital Workforce Initiative, it talks about the replacement or new electronic patient records. And I did read in the press that one of our trusts has got a system that is no longer supported. So I just wonder, when do we anticipate that that whole programme will have been completed, that we have actually modernised new or replaced EPRs?
Can we ask John to answer that?
John?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just picking up the first point around the system out of support. That's currently a risk around a replacement system. So it's a current system was due to be replaced in 18 months, and the timeline for the re-procurement has slipped slightly to the right. So there's a risk at the end of that programme that the old system will need an additional support wrap put around it until the new system is deployed. In terms of the wider programme, we've got 4 trusts currently looking at procurement. Typical deployment times post-award is 18 months to 2 years. And our existing trusts that aren't in that process have a minimum HIMSS 5, which is the standard, minimum functional standard already. So it'll be 3 years, I would say, before we're at a point where we have a common level of digital maturity in electronic patient records.
Thank you, John. Any further questions? I have one question or clarification needed. It's item 14, data interaction, a patient and public advisory group. I'm the children and young people's champion for this board, so it would be remiss of me not to ask the question about how the under 18s would be engaged in this public advisory work, because it says you have to be over 18 to be part of the group. Brown?
Good challenge, Chair. We met with the Data Interaction Board yesterday, and I know that Andrew Asprey, that's leading that, has opened now the approach to welcome members of the public who want to support that. I will take this very specific query back to there and see exactly what can be done on that front. I think that's a fair challenge.
Thank you. So, Graham, I do think you've got a recommendation for this board at 9.2 on procurement principles that you're seeking the board's approval for. I've read it right?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Can I seek people's approval? You nods. Yep, thank you. And thank you for the report. Could we move on to the report of Director Nursing and Care? Chris, please.
Thank you. So the report highlights this month two areas around all-age continuing healthcare and an update on our maternity and neonatal processes. I'm going to take the paper as read, but I just wanted to bring the board's attention to a number of areas within the report. From an all-age continuing healthcare perspective, I want to bring the board's attention that the management of change for the staff within this service concluded earlier this month, and it's anticipated that the new structure will be in place by the end of October this year. Within the report, there's a table there that provides detail of the key performance indicators for Q1 of this year. It highlights the number of people within Cheshire and Merseyside eligible for continuing healthcare, and it shows a comparison to both regional and national eligibility. It also shows the conversion rate to eligibility. There's also performance data against the 28-day decision to be made for accessing all-age continuing healthcare services. And you also note there is a metric there with the transfer rates for fast-track conversion, which is potentially for our end-of-life patients, allowing them support at home or alternative placement to hospital for their end-of-life care. As you will have heard and seen this morning, that all-age continuing healthcare is a major area of expenditure, and it's one of our main areas of focus for our recovery. There is a dedicated recovery programme established with a senior responsible officer, and one of the areas of focus has been around a weekly care assurance panel which has been established to scrutinise any packages of care costing more than £5,000 per week. Moving on to the local maternity and neonatal system, in line with perinatal safety and surveillance framework, the LMNS are undertaking visits with all trusts in the next 2 months. Focus will be to gain assurance against the delivery of the 3-year plan and the implementation of essential actions from the Ockenden recommendations. We have a joint oversight and support framework which provides with our providers with CQC rating, as I mentioned previously, of requires improvement or inadequate, or those organisations that have emerged from the Maternity Safety Support Programme, which has been a national support programme offer. The report highlights the providers in receipt and their progress. I also want to share with the board that the Cheshire and Merseyside Maternity and Neonatal Dashboard is currently progressing. It was presented at our LMS Assurance Board earlier this month. I plan to share this in future board reports. You'll see there is performance against metrics in the regional dashboard, and it gives the latest figures. So these are the areas that I wanted to highlight, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions on the content within the report.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions, comments on this? Hilary?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's really helpful. Continuing healthcare, huge amount of work that you've done in getting the staff in the right places. I suppose it's, and Alison, I know you're doing a lot of work with the recovery programme. I suppose it's what's next in terms of the focus, because there must be some themes, because there's variations across the places. What themes are emerging in terms of driving that demand, not the conversion rates, but the demand? And what can we, as a system, do to support people earlier in their recovery journey so they don't get into this complex arena of having to have complex packages? That's my first, where my curiosity's taken me. And the second thing is rapid assessments and, you know, getting people into the continuing healthcare system at end of life. And I always have a bit of a difficulty with this, because if we had good end of life services, we invested money and resources in that, we might not need to have as much fast track activity. So those are my comments. But I suppose my crucial question is, in the next 3 months, if we were going to focus down on a couple of areas, what would they be? Now we've got this data visible to us. Thank you.
Chris?
Thanks, Hilary. I suppose I could respond within 2 ways in the fact about the conversion and eligibility. One may around being the complexity and different health outcomes across our system. It could be an answer to why conversion rates are higher than the national conversion. Or it could be related to experience and expertise of our approach to assessment and understanding the information and working in a standardised approach across the system and challenging our approach to that. I think the area of focus lies within good professional practice and also in good commissioning of packages of care. And I would, in one of your answers is what we could do, I would look to my exec colleagues to consider how we could become more digitally enabled to support the ongoing processes around continuing healthcare. I mentioned in the report around the care assurance panel, which has been established, which provides evidence of a robust decision-making process in regards to commissioning packages of care. And it also examines the clinical appropriateness, the quality and the costs as well. And I think you'll agree with, we're seeing some data here that has not been presented previously. And we're in a better position than we were in respect of, if I was referencing the consciously competent model, we're aware of what we need to do and where we need to focus our efforts. I think one of the areas building on that would be maybe to continue to focus that man-marking of our high-cost packages of care, but whilst ensuring we commission the right packages that meet user needs, but while achieving good value for money.
Yeah. Alison, can I just ask a couple more questions, and perhaps you'll come to it. I would hope this board is very concerned about the position that we have around all-age continuing care. It has, a significant impact on patients. It has a significant impact on staff, and it's one of the key drivers for our adverse position for the ICB finance position. And we have been talking about it for nearly 2 years. And I really like the fact that you put data in this. It's really helpful to see the data. But I think the board needs further assurance about when do we think we'll see significant change on the shop floor that yields those better outcomes for the patients that we are serving and for value for money, which is represented by that financial expectation that we have for CHC. Alison, I just take this opportunity to thank you for leading this really complicated, complex, difficult work and hearing some really good things. Do you want to answer a number of questions?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think we do need more scrutiny on this at this board, and I'm very happy to come back with a more dedicated paper on that. So initial thoughts, building on what's already been said, interestingly, I think what we are seeing, so the weekly care assurance panel meets every Friday. It's got both clinical and contracting and finance staff on it, and the clinician who has developed the case presents that to us. And what we are building from that, so we started that in September, is a whole richness of themes and issues coming out of it. So we will be looking at that. We've only had 4 weeks of cases already. The thing that's jumping out immediately is the significant variation that we're paying when patients need one-to-one or enhanced levels of care. And that will be affecting both us and local authority colleagues, because quite often these are jointly commissioned packages. And the variation that providers are asking us to fund is absolutely significant, from something like £18 an hour to over £30 an hour for an enhancement. So that's the first thing that's certainly jumping out as a theme of that. I think the discipline of that panel, that we're asking those clinicians and the multidisciplinary teams to think very carefully about what case they're presenting, what existing services already exist that they could have used rather than using and having to commission individually, I think in and of itself is proving helpful. It's certainly very grounding, because every week we're thinking and listening to our most complex patients in Cheshire and Merseyside and what their needs are. So we will be bringing the things and issues emerging from that. So I wanted to talk about the care assurance panels there. Linking back to Chris, I think we need to be thanking our staff who are doing that whilst they're going through this management of change. It's an additional work that we're putting onto them, so really appreciative for them for doing that. The other work that we're starting to look at, you've already mentioned, is end-of-life care. So we know across the patch, again, we've got different models of end-of-life care, some of which have actually utilised all-age continuing care funding to enhance end-of-life care. So particularly Cheshire have invested additional money, Liverpool. So we want to look at all of those and saying which are delivering best for the patients in terms of the outcomes and value for money to enhance that end-of-life care. That, again, that variation is there across the patch on that. So that's another area we want to focus on. The third one, I'm going to look at Trish over there for the community and mental health partners. It isn't just CHC packages, it's particularly mental health packages of care. And again, honing down on that, those patients that are detained under the Mental Health Act under what's called a Section 117, which is the rehabilitation package when discharged from hospital. So we have got work underway with both Cheshire and Wirral Partnership and Merseyside now to use their clinical expertise with us and our local authority colleagues to really look at whether those patients still need to be on those in those packages of care, and what existing services again we've got to enable those patients to be cared for much more locally. In terms of our finances, it's those packages where we're seeing the most increases rather than continuing healthcare packages. So that's the other area we're focusing on, and I'm really grateful for the medical directors and other staff in those trusts who are now going to be working with us on that. So thank you.
It's really helpful.
Thanks, Alison. Andrew?
Thanks very much. I certainly would welcome a more concentrated time to discuss some of these issues, both at the board and, you know, through the place-based partnerships at local level as well. This is probably the area where the interaction between the NHS and local government, between health care and social care, is probably at its most significant. Obviously, you know, what from a local government perspective, this also represents a very significant cost pressure on us, and when people are not entitled to continuing healthcare because the Cheshire and Merseyside area includes areas of high level of deprivation where people don't often have the assets to qualify as self-funders, it falls back on local government to pick up the tab. And what we don't want is a partial solution that doesn't address the whole system. So I think that's both a positive expression of commitment from local government colleagues to be part of this conversation, both at a individual assessment level, but also at a sort of system level. But it's also a warning not to seek false economies that just shift the cost to another part of the system. And when we measure the savings from our interaction on continuing healthcare. Let's make sure we measure the net savings to the whole system and not just the gross savings that fall to the NHS side of the ledger.
Yes. Graham?
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for that. So, yeah, we've got good engagement with local authorities already. So it's Saeed, the Director of Adult Social Care from Wirral, who's our prime way into this for this work at the moment. But I suspect that all local authorities will need to become more involved. In terms of assurance at this stage, I think the biggest impact we can have is join up how we commission with some of these very big providers who we are contracting with for this care. So the weight of our commissioning between 9 local authorities and NHS Cheshire and Merseyside is significant, and we're perhaps not commissioning in a mature way that we could do with some of those providers, and that will enable both the NHS and the local authority to get better value for money. In terms of that cost shunting, absolutely, we know Graham's made a commitment about that, but I think we have got areas where we are getting to a point where we do need to test out that legal framework about who is responsible for what. And we have got differences in local authorities about how that's actually enacted at the moment. So I think we will get to a point where we will need to test that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Is there any other questions before bringing in Graham? Graham?
Thank you for the questions, everybody, and thank you for the responses, colleagues. The chair of our Finance, Investment and Resources Committee has asked me if we could do a deep dive into this subject matter at their October meeting. Alison, I, Chris and members of Claire's team will be putting together a far more comprehensive discussion document than we can do justice for in a public board meeting, so we can allow that additional scrutiny and hopefully assurance to be achieved, and that will be reported then back here to the board chair.
Thank you. So I am note the report's here for noting, but we'll have one action coming out of it, which is, given the timing of that Finance Committee investigation, that let's expect to see a fuller report coming back to the November board. Thank you. If we could go on to the finance report, Claire.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm presenting here the report that's in the pack, which details the financial position for our whole system at the end of month 4. I can provide some verbal updates because since then we've closed down the month 5 position, and I can provide some verbal updates on that. But just to sort of pull out the key points then, at the end of month 4, our whole system reported a deficit of £138 million. At this point in time, our planned deficit was to be £99.5 million. Therefore, we're just over £38.5 million away from where we plan to be at this point in time. I will say that the month 5 position has continued with that trend. So within that, the ICB itself is £21 million away from where it planned to be at month 4, and the providers were £17.5 million away. So just kind of taking you down to chart 1 in the pack, which is a chart that you'll be familiar with. You can see there that we track the actual financial position each month graphically against the planned profile for the remainder of the year. So the dark blue line shows you where we would be planning to be on a monthly basis between now and the end of the year, and the green line is where we actually are. The red lines then extrapolate our current run rate for the remainder of the year and highlight the significant concerns that we've all got on how the uptick of our plan is not, it is very ambitious. So we've got a significant amount of savings that we need to deliver on in the later part of the year, but you'll see the run rate is not yet demonstrating that we are doing that. So if our run rate continued as it is, which we know it won't, because we will have efficiencies later on in the year. We do know there are things that will only impact later on in the year that can't be transacted yet, so things that you only really do at year end. But nonetheless, that downward trajectory is really concerning. And you'll see from the dotted line, the red dotted line and the solid dotted line, there is no movement between month 3 and month 4, which means there's no improvement between month 3 and month 4. And I will say that I've now got the month 5 mapping of that, and there's no improvement in month 5 either. So the things that are driving that in-year position are provided in detail in the report, but essentially it's probably I'd pull out 4 things. Firstly, the level of efficiencies that all of our providers and ourselves are planning for this year are already behind, and those that are delivered are being delivered more non-recurrently than we had planned. So we planned to deliver majority of our savings plans this year recurrently, so that it puts us in the best possible place for next year, but actually we're delivering more non-recurrently, and the total that we're delivering is behind where we had wanted it to be at this point in the year. The second thing to draw your attention to in the provider sector is that there is a £9 million cost identified of industrial action within these numbers. What we now know is, and this is literally in the last 24 hours, we've now had the funding allocation notified to us that will cover some of the costs of industrial action from NHS England. So our system has received £4.5 million recently, or just will receive in the next couple of days, cash to support that cost, which obviously covers half of it. The pressures on continuing healthcare and mental health packages of care not only impact on the things that we've just talked about now around impact on patients, but the significant increase of costs that we've seen into last year and again into this year means that, and we funded the outturn last year of about a £60 million overspend. We funded that, and we're still seeing significant growth again this year. So the year-to-date overspend on CHC and mental health packages is £14.5 million. And then prescribing is showing some early signs of overheating as well. We get prescribing data 2 months late. All commissioners do. It comes nationally. And the latest data is showing that whilst we are seeing some good progress on quick delivery, we are now looking at an overspending prescribing budget as well. But it is very early days in terms of the level of data we've got for prescribing, so I'm waiting another month until I worry too much about that one. There's lots of detail in here. I'm going to open up to questions. But what I would say is that, as you know, we are in a national sort of, high-intensity financial recovery and support regime. And we've been subject to a series of external reviews into the financial arrangements within all of our 16 providers and our own ICB. I will bring back to our next formal meeting the recommendations of that review and the actions that we're putting in place to address those recommendations. It is really critical that all providers and us as an ICB take urgent action to correct the financial position that we are seeing. The detail that we've done with the external support providers and NHS England to look at what our current risk is between now and the end of the year is set out in the paper. And you'll see that we have currently got, if we look at where our forecast is, and we've done a big piece of work over the August-September period for all of our providers and the ICB itself, and we look at what mitigations are potentially available to us, what pressures we think we might experience between now and the end of the year. We are still identifying a gap, even throwing all the mitigations we've got that we can think of at the moment, we've still got a gap of £63 million in order for us to deliver our plan of a £150 million deficit. So that is obviously concerning our regulators, it's concerning us, and you know, there is phase 2 of our support package now will kick in, and that will be around interventions within individual organisations and support and intervention alongside us in the work that we're doing, particularly on CHC and mental health packages, to really identify those actions that need to be taken quickly to pull the budget back in line by the end of the year. We have got a deficit plan of £150 million that we've agreed nationally. That is not something that is, there's a number of systems that are in, have a balanced plan. So I think the focus on us around delivering that deficit plan is significant, and you know, the urgency of the actions that we need to take before year end are significant. So I'll pause there. I can talk more about phase 2 interventions and meet some kind of additional assurances that we're putting in place across our system. We've already talked about CHC quite a bit today and the recovery work that Alison is doing, but it's a very challenging position that we're looking at the moment for our system.
Thank you, Claire. Before I open to questions, let me just ask Graham, Chief Exec, given both the significance and the urgency of what we've just heard, what assurances can you give to the board about the urgent actions that are being led by the executive that will help remedy the situation?
Chair, we effectively suspended business as usual operations and decision making within the ICB and placed ourselves on an emergency footing. We've established a recovery committee, and we've established a number of recovery programs that are focused on taking the actions that will help us get cost under control. Now, one of the things that we have to remember is a lot of our services are by nature demand-led, and a number of our budgets are effectively ring-fenced for certain areas and purposes. What we are also doing is we're instigating processes that says we will not commit another pound of expenditure where we are not legally obliged to do so. And again, we will bring back to the board a discussion on the consequences and the impact that may have, but we're currently formulating that. When we turn now to the provider sector, and again, the majority of the costs are incurred in the provider sector, we have put in place arrangements that require each of our providers to have a series of very specific controls in place, and in some regards we have put in place PAN system controls. So for instance, for any non-clinical post above a certain pay grade, any organisation that should wish to fill that post, they would have to come to a system-wide peer-reviewed panel to determine that effectively that post is essential to deliver either statutory duty or to protect quality and safety of services. The ICB itself has a near complete vacancy freeze in place as well. And I think the reason these things are important is it helps get the message out, and it becomes part of the culture that says, as a system, we are spending too much money and we have to reverse that trend.
Thank you. So questions? I think I've got Anne, Steve and Neil.
Given all the problems we've just rehearsed around how difficult it is with continuing healthcare and prescribing, and then all of the things that I'm very familiar with in the provider sector, in terms of things like the overheating urgent care and the extreme cost of that, and then a small figure but significant that the industrial action only gets funded 50%. It just surprises me that there are other systems, ICBs, that seem to be able to cope with all of those things. And I just wonder whether these places where you've said they're in balance, I mean, are they in balance on the month 5 run rate or the month 4 run rate, wherever we've got access to now? Or is it like some heroic forecast that they will be in balance by the year end? Where's everybody else at?
Yeah, I can answer. So there isn't a published set of data. So a lot of my intelligence is built through informal channels. I think that it's a bit of both, but what I do know is that, and again it's anecdotally, but we at month 5, which is hot for the press, but at month 5 our position is, I think, something as a system, something like £168 million deficit year to date, which is basically a continuation of that trend we've just seen. It's just literally an extrapolation. So £168 million year to date deficit. Our forecast is for our plan is for £150 million deficit by the end of the year. So at month 5, we have, got more deficit than we would have at the end of the year. I think there are only 3 other systems in the country that are in that position that have got more deficit experienced in the first 5 months than they're planned to have, or their position is worse now than it should be by the end of the year, regardless of whether that's a deficit or whatever. Most of, I'm sure, certainly back-ended profiles of efficiencies, because that's kind of how efficiencies generally deliver. But I think that is particularly stark in our system. And we're a big system, so the numbers are always big. But I think the gap and the challenge is now both in terms of percentage and numbers.
Steve.
So I'm going to thank you, Hilary, for your candour of your analysis of what is quite a serious situation, and perhaps ask that you adopt a collaborative co-production approach with local government about the situation as it develops, because I think we are rather concerned about potential cost shunting, things that can't be afforded on with the NHS resource, certainly cannot be funded by local government. We could give a very similar analysis to the situation with our own revenue budgets, and it's the intended and unintended consequences of reduction of those input of resources that may be very serious in terms of the quality of health and social care and health generally throughout our patch. So the Recovery Committee, I would simply ask, can we please take account of the need to do this in a collaborative way with those savings with local government, please?
Graham, I think the answer is yes, is it?
I think the answer is very much yes, and apart from some very odd exceptions, which we'll be very transparent about, I am very clear that cost shunting is not the answer.
Thank you. Neil?
Yeah, I'd like to try and reinforce what Claire's been saying and thank her for the work. It's not been easy trying to pull all this together. But this time of the year, I'm normally optimistic about the year end, that the black arts and everything else comes good. But looking at these forecasts now, I'm not optimistic. I think we are clearly going to miss our £150 million deficit control total. The worst case scenario is heading towards £400 million. If I look at page 42, the key themes which Claire's identified, like unachieved efficiencies of 20 million, we know the efficiency targets are back-ended, so that could get even worse. If I look at our recovery plans, which are focused around CHC, mental health and prescribing, they've not delivered. And that might well be because demand's there, but our recovery programme is not delivering what we've expected of it. So I'm really concerned about this, and I'm concerned for 2 reasons. One is we've got the in-year position, but my theme is about the underlying position. What's it going to look like for the next 3 to 5 years? We need to understand that so we understand the scale of what we have to do here. Because this is not about CIPs, this is not managing down, this is about major change and reform we need. So that £150 million is a target which we say, oh, great if we hit it, but that's still a deficit. And there's an underlying position. So next year, we're going to be in the same position, firefighting. We really need a handle on what the longer-term service and financial strategy looks like, so we can be realistic with ourselves and say, what is it we need to do? But at the moment, I'm not assured that we're going to achieve our control total this year. I'm really concerned that we're going to miss it. And even if we do hit it, I'm still concerned about the underlying positions going forward, because these challenges are not going away. It's an annual fight to get to where we want to be, which doesn't address the underlying issues. So yeah, a great deal of work's taken place, but I'm not assured that we're going to hit the control total this year from what I'm seeing in terms of the actions. And I'm not sure how quickly, if it's all possible, to be able to turn that round. So I think that's a challenge for the executive team to come back to us, to look at the in-year position, look at what actions we can take urgently, or be realistic and say we can't. And let's get into the transformation, let's get into the longer term change, because this year's done. What's coming is even worse if we don't get ahead of the game.
Thanks, Neil. Just summarise Neil's point. I think, unless people disagree, we all share that concern, as articulated by the finance report, that our position is pretty precarious with regard to being able to deliver on our agreed plans. I think everybody knows that. That's really, really important. And we've heard from Graham about what the executive are doing for in-year to try and recover the position, but we don't remain assured that that will deliver the position. That's the position I think we're all in, and I think the executive don't disagree with that. Neil makes a further point about the underlying position, i.e. how financially sustainable is Cheshire and Merseyside over the medium term? Do you want to give some comment on that?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I accept all that you and Neil have said. This is of significant concern. This is at the forefront of our minds. One of the things that is very difficult, though, is we will not seek to balance the budget at all costs. One of the issues here is there is a threshold that we must never go beneath in terms of the quality and the safety of our services. And already we know that some of the things we do means that we are taking decisions that place our frontline services in a difficult set of circumstances. The NHS, unfortunately, has fallen into the trap of recent years of existing on very short time, single-year planning cycles. And one of the things that I would say to colleagues here is you have already heard the government say there will be no more money for the NHS without reform. It is also likely that we will not get planning guidance, which also sets the financial envelopes for future years from the NHS, probably until the last working day before Christmas. We cannot wait to do that. We will set out our own planning guidance for all parts of our system, and we will set those out now in the context of, let's call it a 3-year recovery plan. And there will be a certain number of things that have to underpin that 3-year recovery plan. One, the deficits must reduce year on year. 2, we must exploit every opportunity to integrate services, remove duplication, and that is why we've got a number of initiatives going on that rearrange the way we work and do business within our systems. But thirdly, that we also have a clear acceptance now that the size of our hospital system should not grow further, and our investment must be in transformational services outside of our hospitals in primary, community and related settings. And we're going to work on this over the next month or so, and we will set out a framework for next year, and that will be ready to come back to the board and through some of our subcommittees in advance of our next meeting, Chair.
Thank you. Tony?
Thanks, Raj. Claire, in 3.5, you set out very clearly, very succinctly, the drivers for the overspend. And we've dealt with a number of them today, mental health services, continuing care and so on. But you pointed out there's a pressure of 7.7 million in the prescribing budget. And later on, in the next paragraph, you point out that although the cost per day is reduced, there's an issue with no cheaper stock options. So can you expand a little bit on that? Can you quantify the impact of no cheaper stock yet? Or is that something yet to be quantified?
I'm sure that our chief pharmacist can, but as I sit here now, I can't. The trouble we've got with our prescribing data is it's 2 months, 3 months out of date. So we've done a lot of forecasting with the chief pharmacist, and we are concerned that at the moment that we are going to be off plan for drugs by the end of the year. I think the number is in here. I'll just find it. But I don't have the number for the NSCO, sorry.
That's okay. So the second part of it is there any potential relief from NHS England for costs which appear to be outside our control?
No, I mean, we get the adjustment every year, but no, there won't be any more funding for any of that.
So that's likely to remain a pressure throughout the year?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Perhaps we could circulate outside this meeting some more specific responses.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't got the question of the non-stock, but the prescribing forecast at the moment is to overspend by 14 million.
Okay, thank you. Are we happy to move on? So we all understand the deep concerns that we have about our current financial position. The report here is both for information but also to provide assurance. We've expressed that we don't have that assurance, and we've got further actions that we'll hear about, I'm sure, at every single board meeting for the foreseeable future. Claire, I think you're reporting on behalf of Erica on the Finance Committee. Is there anything further you think you need to add, or I'll look for questions on the next agenda item, financial?
I think I covered that within the report that I gave. There are a number of other things that the committee considered in its work since we last met. So a number of procurement decisions which we've ratified, which are set out in the paper that Eric has circulated. We did a 6-month review of the non-financial and financial benefits of the in-housing of the Midlands and South Lancashire CSU. And we also reviewed the system strategy for infrastructure, which is later on the agenda today.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Claire, on the Finance Committee report? No, so we'll take that for noting. Thank you. Anthony, if we could move to the Integrated Performance Report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just conscious that later on in the agenda there's a further paper on some elements of urgent care improvement and also on elective, but I will still draw out some salient points for both of those items. Okay. So in terms of UEC, or emergency care, as we talked briefly about at the AGM, there has been a further announcement of tiering, which is an announced fresh focus on ED metrics, in particular run up to winter. And that's particularly the time in department for both physical and mental health patients that we see across Cheshire and Mersey. Just to put that in context, Cheshire and Mersey has about 15.5% of its patients will experience waits over 12 hours in an ED setting, compared with the 8.6%, which is the England average. The way in which that support offer is being mobilised, it is from the recognised GIRFT and ESIS teams. But importantly, the support that is being offered is in response to that requested by the individual organisations themselves. And as from this week, those clinical teams are on site for the next 12 weeks. And it's very much one of not just diagnostic support, it's one of providing some extra bandwidth to implement any changes that are required. What I would say, and as I pointed out earlier, is within that, we also need to recognise some of the other corresponding metrics outside of the hospitals. So whilst we do have a long wait within the ED, as you can see from the report, it is pleasing to report the improvement that we see about ambulance response times in Cheshire and Mersey. Not only are we achieving year-on-year improvements in that respect, the latest period actually shows delivery of the standard, which is one of the first times we've seen it in this particular time of the year. We are seeing very minor improvements in terms of our year-on-year in performance in 78%, but it is those long elements of stay that we're focusing on. In terms of planned care, we know we have the objective of the elimination of 65 weeks, certainly by the end of the year, but the primary aim was to try and do that by September. Clearly, we have seen some of the impact of industrial action earlier on in the year. I expect that we will probably land that position at about 450 patients at the end of September that will have waited in excess of 65 weeks. That's after accounting for individuals that have exercised patient choice or indeed are medically unfit. But still a strong drive that we'll be able to get on top of that before the end of the year, at which point we will probably understand through planning guidance what the next objective will be in that phased reduction. In terms of diagnostic performance, that is now, the waiting list for that is now at the lowest level since the pandemic. And very importantly, it's half of what it was this time last year, so a real improvement seen across the diagnostics. Overall, cancer performance remains strong. We do have some particular challenges around the 28-day diagnostic standard, particularly for those patients that are experiencing a referral onwards into a tertiary centre to get that final diagnostic. But within that, the overall 62-day performance is where it needs to be now that backlog has been managed more effectively. We still have the issue around the 31-day standard around Liverpool Women's. They have had some support in there. There was a meeting with the national team last week. The Cancer Network is providing some wraparound support. I do expect that we'll be able to get on top of that over the next couple of months, and I would expect a recommendation around a reduced tiering support into Liverpool Women's as a result of that. So I'll pause there, Chair. I'm quite happy to take any comments on that particular aspect, and I know equally other colleagues are around other more clinical aspects of the performance report.
Thanks, Anthony. Any questions? Ruth?
I've got two questions, quite separate. The first one is, I'm just responding to Graham's suggestion of strategic direction, and Darcy said this as well, that we should grow out of hospital services. Looking at our performance report, I have a concern that we need to establish a stronger baseline understanding of what we're doing now so that we actually make an evidence-based approach to investment in future service models. So my question is, how are we anticipating that we put more visibility on the services outside hospital in our quality and performance work so that we actually build a baseline now to help us understand what we're delivering now? My sense is we have very few indicators, we have lots of separate projects being added on, and we really do need to get to an understanding of the baseline position so that we can then properly assess whether we're making a real difference to people in the community. So that was one broad question. And then my second question...
Should we answer that first question then? We'll ask Graham, but Trish, perhaps you could give a view as well?
You're absolutely right. The NHS has invested heavily in counting and measuring things that are associated with our acute hospital, but we have a very wide variety of both the methodology of how we measure some out-of-hospital services, in some cases still relying upon old, what people in the NHS would have known as Kerner data, where we just measure inputs and not outputs. Now, in some parts of our patch, we are seeing our community providers develop significant improvements in the use of their information systems, so that we do have now some better understanding and baseline and thresholds, but we don't have them uniformly across all of the partners. We also work with primary care in terms of how we're able to count and measure workload and workflow in that setting. And again, we are supporting a couple of projects around how we get better data out of primary care that enables us to look at demand and supply against one another, so that investments could be targeted more appropriately. But what I think you're really getting at, or should be pushing us for, is the development of an out-of-hospital strategy that sits alongside the question that your colleague Neil has already asked today. And we will give some thought over the coming weeks as to how we would formulate a very specific out-of-hospital and community strategy that describes a baseline, and therefore we can have an ambition. And we can also monitor really carefully how we're doing against that.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, and I'd like it to also be reflected in our quality and performance monitoring as the strategy unfolds, so it's properly integrated, but thank you.
Thank you very much, thanks Raj, and I think it's a great question, Ruth.
Trish, you need to be closer to the mic.
I'm just saying, I think it's a great question, Ruth. Certainly community and mental health organisations have a vast range of indicators and measurements in terms of people waiting, for instance, urgent care treatment centres, district nurse and psychology waits, etc., mental health. And if we're really looking at waits, we need to see that whole gamut, because actually, just thinking about mental health, people waiting in A&E, there's a huge amount of people waiting in community for beds too. And we can't really assess the whole thing unless we look at that data as one. So certainly the data is there in a much more mature way than we've seen previously. And I think I'd certainly welcome that here, Chair, so that we can assess the whole issue about capacity before any other decision is made going forward.
Thank you, Trish.
And what we know is that variation is the enemy of efficiency, don't we? And the variation that we've got in out-of-hospital services is probably more extreme across our patch than it is in many others. And when I worry about why does everybody else seem to be able to do this financially better than us, you know, some of it may rest within some of the organisation that which are a legacy of the number of places. So, you know, so my trust, you know, 6 different places to play into, and those are the legacy of a previous CCG, PCT, whatever before it. They've commissioned all kinds of different things to different standards for different organisations. And then even within, you know, any one place, you might have all sorts of, looking at Alison and thinking, knows they must have more community different providers than probably anywhere in the country, I'd probably say. And we've just got to get this so that we're saying, what is it we need to ensure that we can do this shift into, you know, better pre-hospital care, better post-hospital care, or even better completely avoided hospital care. But we're not going to get there when we've got this absolute myriad of all sorts of things going on and massive variation even in one provider's catchment, never mind across the whole of the ICB. So the first thing we need to do is get sorted what it is we need to be delivering, at what standard, how often, with what skills, in order to deliver what we're trying to deliver here. And that's where we need to start with, how to fix this problem.
Yeah, well said, Anne. So understanding what good looks like and then articulating that into a strategy that then we can then measure in terms of our progress, hugely important on this. Was that, have I missed somebody else? Did somebody else have their hand up? Ruth had a second question. Ruth, sorry, yeah. Oh, sorry, Warren.
I'm just trying to think through what we're looking at in terms of a new government, new models of thinking. It was really positive to see Graham's offer into Cheshire and Warrington about what that model might look like as that offer develops. And we know there's conversations across Liverpool City region. We're not quite clear what the future of public service delivery looks like, what the model of integration will be. and importantly from my perspective how we make the most of the assets we've got on the ground through voluntary and community sector and other strengths we've got. Different places have different needs. I'm just slightly concerned that we need some principles around thinking through what the best way of integrating and developing those models from a bottom-up way of approaching these things, labour of reference, double devolution again, rather than coming up with a Cheshire and Merseyside top-down model that is cascaded down. And we've seen problems with that, where it works in Liverpool and it won't work in other places just because the communities are different, the needs are different, and the way things operate are very different. So I'm just slightly concerned about getting into a bit of an NHS perspective on how we develop something that cascades down into an integrated out-of-hospital model rather than thinking through how we create one that's bottom-up.
Thanks for that. I've taken for read that everything we do around an integrated care board is led by that big I integration. So when we talk about an out-of-hospital services, it must be with that core principle about integration between all our partners who are sat around this table. But please keep on challenging us. Absolutely really important to challenge us. Did you want to say something?
If I may, and I think it's both and, not either or. So I'll give you an example of here sitting in East Cheshire today. In one part of East Cheshire, you can be discharged from hospital and receive community antibiotic service. In the other part of East Cheshire, you can't. And that is a legacy of the historic way in which the NHS made decisions, even though it is the same service provider for both parts of that geographic patch. So Anne is absolutely right. We have to sort out some things that are basic in our service specification and about consistency. Now, what I would say, and it emphasises the point that Raj has made, you know, we also have a number of organising principles. And for services like this, we have to know that we are able to deploy them, and depending on where you are in our patch, they will use a slightly different language. But this point of bottom up, either within care communities or within neighbourhoods or within networks. So absolutely, those footprints that we drill down from below our 9 local authority places, the care communities or the neighbourhoods, are the areas at which these services need to be deployed, need to be relevant, and need to be joining up.
Thanks, Graham. Ruth, I think you had a second question.
I did, thank you. Completely separate point. We've talked about healthcare acquired infection regularly at the board, and I know there's a lot of focus and effort going in, led by Chris. I suppose my question is, what else do we need to do? Because the data really don't look like they're going in the right direction. And secondly, are we satisfied that those organisations that have got substantial levels of healthcare acquired infection, that the boards are monitoring this, that the leadership of the organisations have access to all the same data, and are we convinced that they are taking a leadership role in this? And so my question there on the second point is, does this come up in chief exec meetings? Is there a real focus at the provider level? And the first question was, what else can we do as an ICB?
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Yes, there is more that we can do in respect of healthcare associated infections. I think you asked the question about how the provider boards oversee this. I think I'll start by saying how, as an ICB, we monitor this. So our places have a quality schedule for each of our provider organisations, and healthcare associated infections is part of that quality schedule, and that's discussed at the quality performance meetings. I will make sure that the governance routes for each of those provider organisations is clear and embedded within that quality schedule. I could give you an example of how it may be, but it can be different in different organisations, but I think we do need to look at that. I think the other thing that we need to do is maybe in how we display the data. I think the data here, and we're working quite closely now with the business intelligence team in respect of healthcare associated infections, rather than seeing linear figures to look at how we use SPS run charts so that you can see whether there's been normal variation in that data or whether there's been statistically significant changes. I think just one of the other things that, you know, we are throwing what we can at this. CMAST, our provider collaborative, we've commenced an ICB collaborative approach focusing on reducing particularly C. difficile toxin as part of the Efficiency at Scale programme. And there's a number of our organisations involved in that. So I think we're also looking at how we can use our Aqua colleagues to support us in developing this collaborative further. So there's quite a lot of work going on, as you say, monitoring through the quality schedule, but we'll make sure that we pick up your point around the governance route through the provider organisations.
Thank you, Chris. Any further questions? Have I missed anybody? Rowan?
Further to that, two other really important threads is one around consistent prescribing of antibiotics in the first place, some of which are associated with higher or lower risk of acquired infection. So harmonised formularies, particularly for out of hospital. That is now coming to pass. We're working with Liverpool University on antimicrobial resistance, which plays, the two are intimately connected, and some quite innovative work with generics, which is looking at how you might predict risks of acquired infection. And for our most challenged trusts, I specifically have put this in with their medical directors that gets brought to each of their system oversight groups where we meet with them separately. So we've got both the ability to seek the assurance around progress, work with them, as well as bring some innovative and collaborative work across the system to support. Thanks.
Thank you. Tony?
Just to add on to Rowan's point there, at next month's Quality and Performance Committee, we've got a report coming looking at infection prevention control processes and antimicrobial resistance from the chief pharmacist perspective. We're joining these up because they do work absolutely together in this. So I'm not sure what the product of that's going to be, but that'll be brought back to the board because we think it's got a significant impact on individual patient experience, but also impacts on the system as a whole in terms of delays, discharge and so on. So look forward to that.
Thanks, Tony. Anne?
This is another downside of the overcrowding that's going on as well, because you know, what we've got is extra beds being put onto wards that we've never would have dreamt of in the past, so much less space. And obviously, if we are in a situation of corridor care, that's not a great place either. So I do think part of the additional challenge we've got, it's always really difficult, is that's another one of those downsides of this isn't where we need to be in terms of the crowding that we've got right now at the moment. So I mean, we have a root cause analysis of every case of a hospital-acquired infection, and so many of them now are something, there's some element of the overcrowding that's been a factor in that infection being transmitted.
Thanks, Anna. If I may, Anna, what you can see across the patch, and given the assumption that most of our EDs and our general beds can be overcrowded, you can see distinct variation again. So some organisations are managing that additional risk, as clearly there is, in ways that are better than other organisations. I know that's a statement, a generalised statement. I think none of us are in the position where we're thinking we can't do something about this, because we know our past history shows that we can do something about it, even in the most pressurised of times. So I think we welcome, Tony, the deep dive from the Quality Committee and a return to the board. Anne was making a point about finance, I think, in terms of what's our comparative performance with other ICBs. I think in the Northwest we're not the bottom. There is, you know, significant pressure in other systems. But it's interesting you made the comparison, Anne, because when I was going through the papers, trying to, if you like, make sense of where do we think we are on the performance report, I did something very crude and simple. I went through the indicators where we are benchmarked against other ICBs and just wanted to know whether we were better than the median or below. Because it gives you a feel, doesn't it? It's a subset of all the performance indicators that we're on, but these are some of the indicators that form, for our national colleagues and the people who hold us to account, they form a large part of their view of whether we are a well-managed system or not. And unfortunately, we're in the third quartile of overall performance. We've got 10 indicators above the median and 16 indicators below the median. There's nothing, I don't want really any response to that other than we should just absorb that, and every now and again we should take stock of where we are overall in terms of our performance. So, thank you for the report. Anthony, are we happy to move on? Tony, anything you want to highlight from the committee?
Yes, thanks. Just very briefly, we looked at two issues regarding hospices. The Hospice of the Good Shepherd and the Marie Curie in Liverpool, both of them, for different reasons, had to be closed to admissions while assurance was gaining CQC's terms, but also there were issues around vacancies and absence within the nursing team at another provider. So the committee has requested a detailed assurance it be brought back to outline the contractual oversight for arrangement for hospice provision. I think this is one of our gaps that we intend to look at. The second one relates to Cheshire and Wirral Partnership, and the committee looked at a recommendation that due to the limited assurance received to date in the improvement process, the trust should be moved from an outcome framework rating of 2 to 3. And I think, Chris, have you got an update on that?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And the decision to change a rating within segmentation sits with NHS England at the regional level. And that has been approved at that level now. So we're working closely with the organisation to develop a system oversight group, as we would for any organisation with a segment 3. This is a supportive arrangement. So we're developing the exit criteria closely with the organisation, and we're considering what support offer we can put with the organisation to assist them to move back to a lower segment. Thank you.
Thanks. I could just finish on saying that the report making that recommendation was extremely well presented, and it provided the committee with a very rational, very logical summary of processes to date, so it was not a difficult decision to make, and it's one that Chris has pointed out has been made in collaboration with the provider, so an excellent piece of work for Chris and her team.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you, Chris, and to your team. Are there any questions for this report? No.
Chair.
It's there for assurance. Thank you. Move on to the... Who was that? Trish, apologies.
Sorry, Chair. I was just going to ask Chris how patient experiences, patient feedback and experience is included in the service improvement plans, and where that information comes from.
So specifically around patient experience feedback, that hasn't been explicit within the exit criteria, so it's in the 4 areas that we're looking at. There isn't anything specific for me to share with you today, Trish, but I can pick that up outside of the board meeting.
Thank you.
But it's a good challenge, isn't it? Why isn't it? Can we give that some thought, Chris? Because that's the acid test, isn't it? Thank you. So, Mark and Alison, over to you for the Place Directors report.
Thank you, Chair. So a bit of a double act. I'm going to go first, and Mark will follow on, of course. So thank you for the opportunity, Board, to talk on behalf of our 9 Place Director colleagues, emphasising the work we're doing predominantly at that borough-based level. So it's work at and with our local authority colleagues. The first thing I wanted to do was to thank Ruth Hussey, one of the non-execs, who's been out and about visiting the place-based partnerships. So I think it's your role as chair of the Transformation Committee in particular. So we look forward to working with you and learning what you found from your visits to our place-based partnerships. I think what you'll see throughout the report really is our focus that Graham's talked about, given the emergency footing we're on urgent care and financial recovery, and hopefully that is clear in this report. So all of our teams, be that the transformation teams, the quality teams, our finance staff, are really focused on that, both at a local level, but also leading and delivering that work at a Cheshire and Mersey level. So you hopefully can see that threading throughout the report as well. I also wanted just to make sure that we place on record our thanks to Deborah Butcher, who's our place lead in Sefton, for the work she's done on leading the recovery cell after the Southport incidents. We know how much that's affected her as one of our place colleagues, and we wanted just to note that in public as well. There's a lot of focus in the report and in our work. One thing we have kept going is really our leadership around improving the capacity in general practice. And what you can hopefully see in most places now is that our GPs are delivering more appointments than before the COVID pandemic, with the vast majority of those, up to around 70% in some places now, are face-to-face. And we've already heard this morning about a plan for further expansion of those appointments over winter. What we also do is to make sure that we are recording the patient experience of that. So it's all very well saying we've got more appointments. Does it feel different for our patients on the ground? And particularly want to thank our Health Watch colleagues who supplement the annual patient survey, which we get, with much more detailed enter and view visits and regular reporting of how it's feeling for our patients at a place level. And we know our primary care networks and individual practices really value that support. So I wanted to highlight that. You can again see in the report, it references back to Chris Douglas's work that our quality teams are doing around the patient experience of urgent care. And we know how wrong that can be if you're experiencing corridor care. So I noticed a number of places were highlighting that to you. The final one I wanted to highlight before I hand over to Mark is a lot of the work that's been going on around children and young people's mental health. That is a real focus for a number of our places. So if I talk specifically about Knowsley, we had a really good scrutiny meeting with our local authority colleagues on this last week, where you can see both improvements in access and waiting times around children and young people's mental health, led out by Mersey Care, but real support from our voluntary sector colleagues who are such an important part of that delivery at a place level. So hopefully that comes through in some of the place reports here today. So I'll leave it there and hand to Mark, who's going to pick up some other issues. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alison. So just to pull out, and there's a lot of detail in there, but just to pull out some of the examples that are happening right across all of our places. So health inequalities, we've touched on that both in the AGM, but in the board today as well. So there's some great work going on right across the patch. So in Cheshire West, we've seen some of the work that they are focusing, particularly around young people and mental health, and we've heard about mental health several times, and that focus, relentless focus that we need across the local government, family and the NHS. Also in Halton, there's the improvement in terms of the wellbeing bus that is out and about, and there's something about the beauty of working at that kind of place level, whether it's neighbourhoods, care communities, PCNs, and getting out to communities that wouldn't necessarily come forward and working with them. So good to see that happening out in Halton. Within Knowsley, so severe mental illness is tragically a contributing factor to somebody that dies 20 years earlier, which cannot be right. So huge piece of work going on there and also in other parts of our patch. In Liverpool, work around the care communities, which is great to see across the council and the NHS, but particularly using the data into action tools. So not just looking at the data, turning it into intelligence that's making something happen. Within my own borough in St Helens, there's a lot of work that's happened around our Inequalities Commission, chaired by the Chief Executive of the YMCA, and a lot of work that's focused around food pantries, working with our housing provider and our voluntary community faith and social enterprise sector, and particularly proud of the fact that we're doing some work on healthy air for healthy lungs, some money that we've achieved through DEFRA. So Sefton, again, are doing quite a lot of work in terms of childhood, adverse childhood experiences. And I know, Chair, you are the champion for children and young people, and it's really good to see that this runs through a lot of the reports that are happening at place. Just on the patient flow and discharge element of that, again, we've heard around the, certainly around the urgent and emergency care recovery programmes, and we've talked, and I think language is important here, because we've talked about out of hospital. We probably need to change that term and talk, because it seems to have a focus on hospital, where actually there's an awful lot that goes on out in community-based, and that's important. And I'll just draw your attention, because it runs throughout a lot of our places, this home first model, which is predicated on people going home and reducing the number of people going into particularly pathway 3 or 2. So all local authorities and our acute providers and our primary care providers are all focused on that as well. Similarly, in Halton, the focus around their quality of discharge information links to the UEC work that they are doing and is bearing fruit. We've seen in the North Mersey system of Liverpool, the work around the UEC programme, and particularly around their discharge and engagement sessions that are happening right across the Acute Trust and Mersey Care with local government colleagues. And in St Helens, a lot of work that we're doing around utilising AI, so artificial intelligence now, to support the work we do around assistive technology, because we don't have the workforce and we can't wait. We can't. It's not fair on our patients and our residents to be able to wait to be able to train our next workforce. So we're utilising assistive technology to support people to get home and to be safe. So just moving on now to the children and young peoples, just wanted to draw out a few things in that positive things that would congratulate actually Professor Broomhead, because we've seen some excellent ILACS report that's come out, so the inspection of local authority children's services, so good, and 2 areas of outstanding, so excellent to see that. Also in the report you'll see that there's been some challenges, I think, around some of our systems for special education needs and disability, and also ILACS inspections. And while I'm just on the topic of inspections, there is a piece of work that's happening right across the borough at the moment, across Cheshire and Merseyside, where the Care Quality Commission is now continuing its rollout of the assurance visits that they're doing to local authorities. I think they've been to 8 now and requested the data, because they're actually going to work on an ICB footprint. So local authorities are being asked and inspected to present evidence of a whole host of things. But one of the questions they're being asked is their interaction, their interface with their local NHS partners. And the final thing I would just say that's not actually in there, so working with the chair across Cheshire and Merseyside, a piece of work that's going to be commissioned at no cost to the local authority, I might add, due to the chair's tenacity. We are looking at a piece of work around edge of care for children, and we're going to test that out in St Helens, and the view is that we'll look to roll that out, not least across Cheshire and Merseyside. If it's a proof of concept, it could be something nationally that could be utilised. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Ruth?
Thank you very much for the comprehensive report. I think, although there's a lot of detail in there, it's actually really helpful for the board to have a real sense of what's happening, and certainly having visited not all of the place partnerships now, but quite a lot. 2 things really stand out. One is the strength of relationships that are built through these processes, and these activities that are described here. but also the collaboration. I was at St Helens only a couple of days ago, and just even in the meeting, offers were made and collaborative responses to key issues. So, you know, this richness is really reflected in the report. The only thing, connecting back to what I said before, we do need to try and get the data that underpins all of this as well, so we can start to look at impact of some of these initiatives, because I know at the small project level there are data and impacts being shown, but it's how do we build that story, both qualitatively and quantitatively. The report does reference the tragic events in Southport just at the very end, and I just wanted to ask, because clearly the ramifications are ongoing, and the place leadership have really stepped up to deal with the immediate issues, but also this is an ongoing situation. So first of all, huge thank you to the team there who are doing this, but is there anything else that we need to ensure is in place to keep that support going? And secondly, at some point, it talks about lessons learned, and I guess we need to know as an ICB whether there are systemic things that we would want to pick up and learn from in the future, not immediately now, but just can we make sure we do build in any lessons there. And then the third comment I was going to make was I went to the East Cheshire Partnership Board, and there was a presentation about care communities, and it did spark a thought in my mind about how do we bring all of these types of initiatives to the attention of the board so people can see what's really happening out there, because it was really interesting and encouraging to see the leadership from the GPs who were talking about the work they were doing there. So it's a broad question, not for answering now, but how do we surface a lot of this out of hospital activity in a way that we can really understand how things are working? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Mark, I think you wanted to say something.
If I could, Chair, just to respond on a couple of those. So I think that on the lessons learned, I think it's really important. When we did a piece of work a while ago now, when we were talking to the national team around urgent and emergency care, we looked right across the work that was happening across all our places, all our providers, local authorities, and there was a huge amount of rich data and lessons learned there, and we need to get better at applying that, because we're a big system and there's lots of good stuff that goes on, and you see from this report that so we need to take that and get better at kind of rolling that out. I just think on the data it's interesting. So I was at Wiston yesterday walking through you know, an excellent run hospital, and I'm going to Anne's exec team next week to talk about the MWL UEC recovery programme. And one of the things that I've kind of focused in on is that we can get into a lot of debate about the data, but actually we need to deal with some of those root causes. And that data should inform it, not be used as an excuse not to do it. And that's one of the challenges we're putting in, both in terms of the NHS and local authorities, say, right, let's get to the root causes of dealing with that. And just finally, if I could, on the care communities, I think that's really exciting, because the work that, whether we call them neighbourhood care communities, the work that's happening both in terms of primary care and in local government, that could really be a game changer for us. We talked about the complexity, the acuity, and the ability to respond to that. I think that is very exciting.
Thank you, Mark. Graham, you want to say something about Southport?
Yes, I won't repeat the things that we said at the AGM and also written into the Chief Executive's report today, but except to say once the major incident, as a whole system major incident, was stepped down rightly and properly through our local resilience forums, Sefton Council stood up to lead on behalf of all partners the recovery cell. One aspect of that is currently a bid into central government for additional resources to help with both businesses in the area, community in the area, but services within the area, including health. What I would say to you is both Alderhay and Merseyside stood up absolutely immediately at risk to provide services into that area, particularly around psychological support. And again, Chris on our behalf has already been in touch with colleagues at DH and elsewhere about the flow of money for those health services that are obviously exceptional to day-to-day delivery. I'm going to bring in Rowan briefly at a moment to say there have already been some reviews taking place of actually the way that NHS emergency care services operated at that point in time, and I'll ask Rowan to briefly comment about that. But then as for some wider reviews that need to take place, they will not be able to take place whilst criminal proceedings are ongoing, so as not to compromise those in any way, shape or form. Can I hand over to Rowan, please,
Okay.
Chair?
Thank you. I attended and supported a full day where we as a clinical team made up of expertise from the trauma community. I was there not just as a medical director, but also as a trauma surgeon by background, and as well as being a military surgeon by background. We walked through the minute-by-minute journey of all 13 patients, and it was one of the most challenging days of my clinical career. What emerged was some outstanding care. Individuals from all sorts of different backgrounds who stepped in, some on instinct, many on a background of training, many who stepped out of their comfort zones. And whilst more will emerge, and there's not any more real detail I'm in a position to share, on top of the intense sense of, you know, what a difficult day to go through, we left with a sense of amazing people in the NHS, amazing people in services around, both from the fire and the police services that day, our North West Ambulance colleagues, and in particular surgeons who left their own environment to step into another in order to provide amazing care. That's been formally put together into a report that will be shared across the trauma networks so that lessons can be learned. There are some things that will emerge and that will be shared. The other thing that's perhaps relevant to what happened at Southport, I was fortunate enough to successfully connect with colleagues from Grenville. The community response following something that is at risk of devastating a community, getting that right is vital. And I'm very grateful to leaders from Grenville who have stepped up to support Southport, that community is given every opportunity to make the best recovery that it can, both in terms of practically what is done and resources that are garnered to deliver that. So we've been hugely impressed of the support that's been offered in order to help there. And our colleagues in Sefton, clinical leaders and other leaders within that place have been absolutely outstanding. It cannot be overstated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rowan. Trish?
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of points I want to make, and just to add on to what Rowan said. In such tragic circumstances, the NHS and its partners absolutely are at its best. You know, it's such awful things to happen, but the NHS responded in the way that it did, and certainly Cheshire and Merseyside come together in a way that we could be really proud of as an ICB and a system. I think Ruth's point is really pertinent because in these situations, unfortunately, it goes on for a very long time in terms of impact, and it's hard to predict the impact on capacity as we go forward. But what we are seeing is certainly from the psychological support, we're now in phase 2 of that. It's split into 3 phases. And I'm running alongside that is psychological support for our staff, whether they be in the NHS or in local authority or in police or partners, etc. And people who work and live in the area. What I would say is we are seeing the impact now on our mental health services, on our children's services, so school nurses, health visitors, the areas that you may not expect, are not at the forefront. But these are the people who are on the ground every day, working in the community. that actually are impacted by this for weeks, months and years actually. And so it's with thanks to all of them, as Rowan said, wherever you're on the system, the impact is there to be seen.
Thank you, Trish. We will be hearing more about Southport and the reviewing the responses at our November board when Deb Butcher comes to speak to us. The place reports, Alison, Mark, thank you very much. I like Ruth. I thought this report was great. It gave us a lot of information, well structured, and gives us a feel for what's going on. But it leaves you hungry for more. So we do need to figure out how we understand more about what's happening at play. So, but thank you very much. Right. So really poor chairing at the moment, I'm way out of time. So that's a hint. Neil.
Yeah, everything's fine, Chairman. Thank you.
I think you've got some recommendations. In
there's two. Yeah, just a couple of points. One is we stepped down the Executive Risk Committee and the Audit Committee now are overseeing the assurance. That was put in place to ensure the systems were embedded and implemented. So that's changed. IG Services has changed from Central Support Unit to MIA, and they've done a really good job in terms of the transition. And two recommendations there, that the board to approve the operational scheme reservation delegation changes and also to receive the annual report of the Audit Committee.
Thank you, Neil. People happy with that? Yep, thank you. Tony, Remcom.
Thank you, Chair. To assist with your timing, the Remuneration Committee report is as it's stated there. I don't think there are any significant issues to alert the board.
Thank you. Happy. And Tony again, primary care.
Yes, on behalf of Erica, just 2 points she would like in particular to pick up. The work ongoing on the GP patient survey, there's considerable work going on looking at the detailed information, and that will come back to a future meeting of the System Primary Care Committee, but tied in with the improvement plan update, which will be around November. Recognise the risks of the collective action, and particularly around access and data sharing, and significant progress, I think Chris and I would recognise. The Primary Care Quality System Group, covering all 4 contractor groups, is now in place and operating. 2 meetings have been held, and that's progressing well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions for Tony? Chris, Children's and Young People's Committee.
Yeah, it's within the report there, the areas for escalation. The only point I wanted to raise, there was, again, another fabulous presentation from our children and young people, which really set the tone for the committee. And that was around putting children and young people in the centre when we're considering appointments, so making sure they're heard, felt seen and actively listened to. And they certainly got the message across on the day. So.
Thanks, Chris. And if I may, I just want to emphasise a point that's in the alerts on that committee, which is asking for the ICB to do some further work about understanding the pros and cons of how we could, whether we should or shouldn't use children who leave care, people who leave care as a protected characteristic in the same ways that we would use the statutory definitions for protected characteristics. Now, a number of organisations already do that, but it does have consequence if we were to adopt that approach. I'm looking at Chris Samosa at the because it does impact, of course, on staff, but it has a wider impact in terms of our equality duty for provision of services. So, if people are supportive of us charging, perhaps through Chris, for a report to come back to this committee, and what do you think, Chris?
We've certainly been doing some work around the care leavers covenant, so we can sort of enhance that and bring that back to the November board.
Okay, so if we could come back to it in November, then thank you. Ruth.
Thank you. In the interest of brevity, I'll just highlight the issue that we had to escalate, which was the committee was asked to support a commitment to fund the familial hypercholesterolemia and CVD prevention services because of a timetabling issue. They needed to be advised on whether or not funding was available for next year. The committee is actually not, in its terms of reference, is not authorised to actually make that recommendation. Therefore, we had to escalate it to the executive team to consider how to handle that situation. But it did pose for me a wider issue, which is when pilot projects, proof of concept, transformation programs are set up, that we have a clear exit strategy and a plan for either rollout or stopping particular programs. I understand this one has been repeatedly funded several times, at several years, and we're having to make decisions at an urgent level. So that was escalated to the executive team to clarify. And then just to say, we tried a different format for the committee. We had a sort of workshop style where we looked at the sort of basic strategy for Cheshire and Merseyside and talked about how to identify affordable models of care, what system levers could influence change, and how we could systematically support collaboration, integration and stronger public involvement in everything that we do. In the interest of time, I won't say any more.
Thanks, Ruth. And have we got assignment and hopefully in future progression on the point you make about pilots and exit strategies? Because I think I'm looking at you.
I don't think we have. I think we'll have to build that into the future planning. Graham's talked about some sort of planning, I suppose, rules and guidance coming forward ahead of the national guidance, and we'll have to incorporate it into that. And I think the wider piece of work in terms of models of care that we talked about, again, fits very nicely with the conversation we've been having in terms of out of hospital, integrated neighbourhood teams. So again, it's something we can pick up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. So do we want a 10-minute comfort break? Let's get back at 5, just after 5 past, 5 to, I should say. So we're on agenda item 17. Anthony, you're leading the discussion.
I am, thank you, Chair. So yes, a paper here to provide the board with an update on the development of the Urgent and Emergency Care Improvement Plan, its governance and key objectives. If you don't mind, Chair, I will just draw a bit of a brief background as to how we got to this and the design really of the programme. You know, we've talked quite a bit this morning in various settings about the challenges of the UEC system across Cheshire and Mersey, and I guess from a national sense that was recognised back in September 23 when NHS England launched its UEC tiering system, and a bit like we had as a commentary early on about segmentation, really that was not done in the sense of trying to critique individual systems. It was aware of channeling improvement resource, and it was seen as a supportive measure. What that did do is it looked at a range of metrics across the urgent care settings, such as ambulance response times, long waits in ED, as well as occupancy levels, as well as the number of patients going into social care. And it highlighted that for this particular system, the most challenging systems were Liverpool and the Warrington system. And support was put forward to assist us with that. We asked for a particular diagnostic support from a company called Newton that were seen as the experts in that particular field. And as the board's aware, as we've had previous updates, they provided back the output of that diagnostic work in spring of last year. I guess what that told us is nothing that we didn't necessarily know, but it absolutely provided clarity on the factors as how the UEC system was panning out across those particular sectors. And it also presented the opportunity that could be driven in them. That insight, but more importantly, the way in which those local systems embrace that diagnostic to produce an improvement plan, with in particular clear objectives, but I think what's really critical, and we've talked about relationships earlier today, is it developed a level of ownership about where the issues stood and how collectively they would be addressed. Too often we find when we discuss about the challenges of the UEC system that, you know, individual parts of the system will point to the solution being elsewhere, and I think what we saw in those particular patches was absolutely a collaborative ownership of it. We then look to say, well, using the benefit of what we've seen for those two systems, the way it's been embraced, how would we look to roll that out further across the Cheshire and Mersey system? And we went through a number of engagement sessions with providers and social care colleagues, and one of the outputs was that rather than trying to construct an improvement programme that was predominantly around the place setup linked primarily across the local authorities, and therefore having the provider feeding into multiple systems, we should try and turn that around and have the improvement programme based around primarily the provider footprint with various partners surrounding them. And that would also flush out some of the inconsistencies that we see in how certain parts of our system function. So that's been put in place. We have now positioned ourselves to an approach which is 5 locality programmes, 5 place directors as the SROs for those systems, the convener of the system. And there are 5 cross-cutting at-scale programmes as well, so things around ambulance improvement. And I mean that in the widest sense, not just handover, it's also about how our ambulance provider, NWAS, deals with consistently across access to services, see and treat, hear and treat. And that's the bit that's trying to take the best practice of our system and adopt it commonly across. Our provider collaboratives play into that. NWAS themselves lead on one of those individual programmes. So the focus, as I say, from a governance design point, was born out of what the system itself said was necessary. One of the things that we've asked for to get to the point where we are is to focus on distilling between some of the noise that people often report about in terms of the urgent care system. We're all very good commentators on what is being done to effectively maintain today. And what we're not entirely clear about is that where we're talking about some direct initiatives or interventions, precisely how would it manifest itself in terms of impact? So one of the things that we drew up as part of the development was that we wanted to see a very consistent set of metrics. 9 metrics that would be drawn up across the entire urgent care system, leading to, for the purposes of this year, almost a North Star metric of the elimination of corridor care that we see in our acutes. We chose that one because we see it as a barometer, really, of how the entire patient flow system is functioning. It's not just to say we want to fix that particular element. We just see that as that's the bit that flags up as a product of us trying to manage risk across the entire system. So where we sit right now, we've had some of it fade out through the Place Director report that Alison and Mark reported on, is that we do have that plan built up with impact expected for each of those 5 localities. And whilst I think the bottom line is that right here, right now, we're not seeing a massive change in today's delivery, we do have a plan which takes us to a very different position than where I felt we were sat last year, where in some respects we were very much talking about the commentary of what we were doing to maintain today. When I say we're not seeing the delivery changing just yet, there are some individual areas that we have seen progress in, and Rowan touched on 1 or 2 of them actually in the AGM. So we have seen, for instance, Wirral making a significant inroad over the past 6 to 8 months in terms of the number of patients that are ready for discharge but still residing within the hospital. And that has been sustainably reduced, but it hasn't changed the overall experience or view of the system in terms of how it's experiencing it at the front door, either in ambulance response or A&E. And I guess what that tells us too is you can't fix just one part of the system. The system, because it's very much demand-led, will very quickly adjust to any improvement in one particular bit. We have to adopt the improvement consistently across the entire spectrum. Similarly, we've seen some really good work in Liverpool already around that discharge interface. If we look beyond the normal metrics of how many patients are in beds in an acute sector, we've got real transactional understanding now of how long it takes from a patient being declared ready for discharge to actually going into the social care. The Liverpool system has shaved over a day off that in the past 5 months, which is really excellent. But the number of beds occupied is still the same. So it's clearly that the demand can quickly change to take account of that benefit. And you know, it could even have generated an element of cost, certainly within the local authorities, by that increase of patients coming through faster and in more volume into that sector. But it is the right thing, and what we need to do is make sure that they're going to the right pathway within that. So where do I stand? I guess in terms of the system, I do believe that we're in the best place that we've been for a very long time in terms of governance, ownership, and importantly, objectives. But as I've just touched on, we're not seeing a massive difference in today's delivery. Some of that is because those plans are very much geared to delivery from September onwards, and we can look to that as the strength of the plan that's been built up to be much more robust. But we know there's no winter monies. We know we've touched on that. So the solution has to be for this system to now use the strength of the governance that it's got, the strength of the plan that it's developed, and move very much into the delivery of that. The way we govern that across the ICB at the moment is twofold. It does come in through the Recovery Committee, which Graham chairs as one of the key programmes. We also have the dual role of the Cheshire and Mersey UEC Improvement Group, which I chair. It's represented at the 5 SROs and the at-scale programmes, and as the place directors have reported to, there's a layer of governance within each locality. And I think we're one particular eye on where we sit right now, where we are in terms of the turning of those dials and the looming pressures of winter. Graham and I have a session over the next 10 days with each of those 5 localities, CEO represented meetings from all sectors, and we'll run through some of the issues, some of the risks that we see, some of the progress, and where we think we'll be over the next forthcoming months. In terms of board visibility, now that we have that common set of metrics, we have developed the reporting solutions to that. We are plugging in the trajectories and objectives that each locality has determined it can achieve on the timescales that it's set. And we have implemented a manner now of capturing corridor care, which we'd never had eyes on before. So we are getting that on a 3 times daily update from our organisations. It's not perfect, but at least we've got eyes on now. So we will change the sentinel metrics within the board report, we will change the metrics within the integrated report, and we will use some of that delivery to inform some of the information that comes out in Graham's weekly bulletin, which is about to be reinstated as we head into winter. So I hope that provides an overview of where we are right now. Clearly the issue is around delivery, and I'd open that up for discussion.
Thank you, Anthony. Questions for Anthony? Chris? Then Warren?
Thanks, Anthony. It wasn't a question really, it was just to support the under 4.9 and the red line toolkit that we developed within Cheshire and Merseyside. And I think it's important that we continue to focus the audit of the usage of that to support eliminating corridor care. And so we're going to use the toolkit as an audit pro forma really when we go out on our quality visits through over the winter. And I know we work quite closely with Louise in Health Watch, and I know Health Watch are really keen to use the toolkit as part of their visits that they'll conduct through EDs over the winter months. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Warren?
Thank you, Anthony. Just one small comment on the sentinel metrics. It was good to see. It was just whether there should be something on readmission rates on the discharge pathway. Unless it's covered in there, I'm just missing it. Sorry, there you are.
So within each programme there are a wider extent of indicators. Readmissions is one of them, but it's not necessarily the sentinel metric that we agreed as the output from each programme that we can keep focused in on, but we can, as I say, we've still got eyes on that.
Thanks, sir. Got Louise. Thank you. Got Louise and then Trish.
So thanks, Chris, for the red line toolkit. That's what I was going to be asking about, and we will be using it. I believe it will be in there, but I'm not explicitly seeing where patient experience and therefore quality is upfront and central in this. Am I missing it, or is it not?
Well, I think we are saying, if to put it into hard sentinel metrics, I think what we're saying is that, you know, our patients, our staff are telling us that corridor care and the quality that they're receiving within the ED is not where we need to be. Yeah. So that is our North Star metric, but it's made up of also understanding that probably a third of our patients are probably arriving at the front door of a hospital when they could be going into a community service that has capacity, and we're able to measure that. It's also pointing at the back door of a hospital, maybe a third of our patients are going into the wrong care pathway setting. So reporting that there isn't anything within the sentinel metrics that's looking to gain in patient experience, but I think we can, I'm sure that's built into some of the locality programmes. I'll take that back and explore it further, Louise.
Thanks. I've got Trish, and then Anne, and then Hilary.
Thank you, Raj. Agree with Anthony that this is some of the best oversight that we've seen, and completely support what Anthony's saying actually here. Secondly, you know, really pleased to see a focus on reducing corridor care. It is a barometer of what's happening in the whole system. I think it's you know, great that the ICB are doing that, because it really reflects what's going on and what happens for patients. Also pleased to see that this is a whole pathway response and focus from admission avoidance all the way through, including mental health and children. So again, you know, support Anthony all the way with what he's doing here, and to see that focus of the whole pathway. I think what we are seeing is we know now where the issues are, and we're starting to see movement across the tiers, which is positive in one way, because we're seeing people being placed in the right place. We didn't have that information before, so it bears well for the future. It's going to be very challenging, but I think we've got the focus in the right place from the ICB.
Thank you, Trish. Anne?
Nobody could ever argue with the idea that we don't want to do corridor care. I can't even believe after so many years in the NHS we're even in this situation. It's just unprecedented, and it's a red line that's being crossed. You know, we should never have got to where we are. But it's such a big figure now. You know, once you get to like 110% occupancy, which is where most acute trusts are, that's an awful lot of additional activity that needs to be happening to actually switch that dial. So it's such a big thing to achieve this. It's the most important thing we could achieve, because I do think from a patient's experience, safety point of view, but also from a staff experience point of view, you know, it's just the worst thing, you know, that I've experienced us having to do in all the time I've been in the NHS. But it is a big figure to shift. I mean, we've got like 25% non-criteria to reside. The longer those patients wait in the hospital beds, the more of a package of whatever it is they'll need when they go out of it. That decompensation thing, particularly for the elderly, is such a massive thing. That can be then, for the rest of their lives, they need that amount of care when it might have been avoided and it might have cost a whole lot less and they might have had a better life for it. You know, so it's all sorts of reasons why we should be doing this, but they are very big numbers to shift. It can't be something at the margins. This has got to be something quite seismic. So some of these things that change things a little bit, it's just such a big problem. It needs to be some big things that change things in a big way in order for us to achieve this ambition we've got, which I hope we do as soon as is humanly possible to do it, because it's not where we need to be.
Thank you, Anne. Hilary?
Thank you. Chris, I think you work around the red lines, which is standards of care that need to be maintained if you are in a trolley, on a trolley, in a corridor, is commendable. I think it'd be useful as a board to have oversight month by month of the incidences of when those lines are being crossed, and then to appreciate through the storytelling what that means for individual people, where those standards can't be maintained even though you're on a trolley in a corridor. And I say this because I heard a story last week from a lady who was in a corridor with GI problems, and she didn't have access to a toilet that provided her enough privacy and dignity, and let alone enough sleep. So it's things like that, that even though people are in that unacceptable situation on a trolley in a corridor, there are things that we still need to pay attention to, even if they're in situations like that.
Yeah, hugely important, Hilary. Hugely important. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just to echo those points, really. I mean, underpinning all of this is some pretty horrific patient experiences, and absolutely needs to be front and centre of this. I mean, I really welcome the approach. It seems like we've moved on quite a long way, actually, because I think for a long time the focus was on the discharge point as being the sort of only problem to be fixed. And I think the way you've described it, actually, that you began to solve one part of the problem only to see it manifest elsewhere in the system, I think is absolutely, you know, our experience as well. So even although this is called an urgent care, you know, is labelled as an urgent care issue, it's actually a whole system issue, and it's directly connected to the earlier conversations we had about the financial pressures on the system, because ultimately this is just one symptom of a wider challenge, which is also then giving rise to the cost pressures, both in the NHS and also to us in local governments as well. It was particularly good, I think, to see in 4.15 the emphasis on not just discharge per se, but where people are being discharged into, because too often we may be solving the discharge problem but locking in inappropriate care potentially for the whole life course of that patient. So actually relating this back to the challenge that we face in social care of finding the right level of care and maximising the home first approach where that's possible, absolutely critical to this, as well as the emphasis on the front door and the prevention of hospital access in the first place.
Thanks, Andrew. So, Anthony, strong support. Some challenges there in terms of ensuring the board is understanding quality as well as it needs to, and bring it to life through patient stories, which is always effective. And that I think we see it through the Sentinel metrics, don't we? Is what you've recommended. Yeah. Okay, people happy to move on? Thank you. Should we go on to Claire? You're going to head up the infrastructure strategy.
Yeah, I'll introduce James if that's okay. So the next item on the agenda, you'll have in your pack a draft of the Cheshire and Merseyside infrastructure strategy, which is due for submission to NHS England. I'm going to hand over to James Birchall, who is from our estates team, to talk you through some of the key points of that strategy, and then we'll open it up to some questions and comments after that. Thanks, James.
Welcome, James.
Yeah, thank you. We have an estate strategy that came into fruition in at the end of March. It is a 10-year aspirational strategy, looking at pulling all aspects of the NHS estates and assets into sort of one document with obviously directions of travel moving forward. There are sort of three key points really. That is who we are, and obviously we know that. Where we are now, so what is our current situation with the estates? Where do we want to be? And how we're going to get there. And those are the key functions that we've been concentrating on. The strategy has had a number of other people involved in it, directors of estates, from acute mainly, but we've obviously had contributions from community care. ICB has obviously commented on some of this. It's gone out to strategic estates groups that are 9 of, that are supporting place in those decisions. And obviously we've had contribution from primary care through the work that has been done regarding PCN, clinical and estates strategies. So that's the direction where we've been heading with this. Obviously it's going on about infrastructure principles, and these are sort of key directions that we need to sort of be taking really. There are obviously publications. That was more recently the Darcy report that refers obviously that shift left and lack of capital in certainly in primary care, but obviously I think it's generally accepted that obviously there's been lack of investment in the health service infrastructure of recent, but it does pick out the positives of the new hospital programmes, etc., of which we've got a couple of. There are a key number of pieces of work that we need to concentrate on. I think the main one is really the governance and getting the Strategic Estates Board established. That is hopefully going to be taking place in October, and we'll be able to look at the framework, the development framework that we've got out of the strategy, and push that back to strategic estates groups so that they can concentrate on each of their local places and on their priorities, etc. I think the other thing that we need to be very mindful of is obviously around risk, and the risk of a poorly utilised and poor estate and how that impacts on our sort of clinical strategies, etc. So there's a lot of sort of work that we've got to do, and a lot of that is going to be sort of getting the data right and getting the information so that as estates as an enabler that those decisions can be made. Any questions?
Okay. Any questions or comments, Steve?
Well, I really welcome this. It's a really comprehensive piece of work. Also deals, as you say, with the left shift digital agenda in absolutely the right way. I just wonder whether the local authorities can again assist with this, because the government is, we've got its mission-based approach to government policy. Business growth and housing and planning reforms are one of the biggest planks that's been announced, and there are changes coming to housing targets for every area of our patch. Each 9 of the councils are having new housing targets almost imposed, and those housing targets are rising anything between 20 and 40%. Obviously, with that comes the demand on local infrastructure, particularly GP surgeries. So the group you refer to, your estates board, perhaps you might want to include a couple of growth directors, development directors from the councils to assist you in your thinking.
So that sounds a really good and important idea. Graham?
Thank you. Building on what Steve has just said, James, could you just say something about how we approach seeking Section 106 agreements when there is housing development in areas? And I know we have had some success in some places. And then secondly, I can't remember what page it is now. It's page 240 in the pack, or 241 in the pack, but page 37 of yours. Would you say something about the expiry of Liftco deals and how we're starting to think about that, because people will know an awful lot of buildings were built under the Liftco initiative, and for some of those, the end of their 25-year period is probably sooner than we imagine.
Absolutely, thank you, Greg. Section 106 is obviously from the Town and Planning Act 1954, where we can obtain developer contributions towards assets, and there are lots of contributors to that. So there's obviously the education does it, green space, libraries, and health is one of those components. We interact very closely with the planning departments of each council, so we have regular meetings. We also get advised of any developments that are in excess of sort of 10 houses, and depending on each place's policy, they may have a policy where they will state an objection to the development, and we will put a requirement in for NHS monies to contribute towards GP premises, etc. We also employ NHS Property Services that gives us professional guidance on any houses that are in excess of 200, so the large scale housing developments. And we have been pretty successful. We've got Section 106 monies more recently of about £3.5 million, but certainly before the ICB, where there's some historical ones, certainly in the Cheshire patches where we've been very proactive with the councils, where we've got surplus of up to sort of £8 or £9 million. Some developments where they're building 1,500 houses, you know, you're getting £2 million potential contributions. The trouble we have sometimes is that the contributions are tied in with the build rate of the houses, so it may be every 500 houses that are built that we will get a lump sum that is not always beneficial to helping build new practices or extend them. As far as the Liftco concessions, it is something we are starting to make some progress with CHP, that are our main Liftco provider, and we've got a very similar situation in the non-Liftco areas with the 3PD developments that were created by the PCT at the time, and they're sort of ending in the next sort of few years, with the Liftcos probably in the next 6 years. So it is something that is going to have to be highlighted within the infrastructure strategy, and again talking to ICB directors and transformational directors on what's that vision going forward and how's that going to look. We've already started the conversations with the central estates team at NHS England as well, so they are going to provide some level of guidance on that.
Thank you. Claire? And Andrew?
Thank you. I really welcome this. I think it's a really good position about where we are. I guess the opportunities and challenges around how we get there and what we want to do, because obviously in estates and infrastructure is a supporting strategy. It shouldn't be the driving one. It should support the sort of clinical and care strategy. I suppose just building on what Stephen said in terms of, I think, you know, this is the ICB plan, but it links to the ICS plan, and it's how we do that one public estate and the opportunities around that. I think it's really important. So just ask about that, but also make sure we align very closely with the Sustainability Board. I know there's something in here, but in terms of the net zero agenda and all of that, I think there are much more opportunities, and its reference isn't here, but I think it needs to build on that. It talks about general practice capital, primary care, it calls it primary care capital, but we know really it's just general practice capital. And whilst there isn't funding nationally for estates and other infrastructure costs around the other three contractor groups, I'd like to think we could use this as an opportunity to look at the art of the possible by using that one public estate, you know, the NHS as a whole, and see what we can do to support all our primary care contractors. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Andrew and then Ruth.
Thanks very much. Claire got ahead of me by mentioning one public estate, which was the the point about I was really going to make. I think, look, it's fantastic to have that overview of the whole of the NHS estate within Cheshire and Merseyside, and it shows just what an extensive estate it is, and how much work there is to do to bring it up to the standards you'd expect, but also the opportunities for efficiencies, for better quality sort of shared spaces for public services and better access for the public. So there's huge opportunities here. With that in mind, I did maybe think of this as a little too within the NHS boundary. And in that spirit of one public estate, I do think there's a lot more you could do by working with your opposite numbers in other public service organisations and at local and indeed neighbourhood level. So like all councils, we're looking at the use of our estate within specific neighbourhoods, Liverpool in our case, but across the whole of the region, looking to see where there are opportunities to consolidate services at local level. And it's often more difficult to breach the NHS boundary in some of those conversations because you're operating within a silo, and often you're locked into contractual relationships often with the private sector, which hinder the flexibility that you can operate at local level. So I would just encourage you to have those conversations at local level, either through the place directors or through convening the sort of estate experts from different public service areas. Should be looking at things like integration with job centres, given the emphasis on helping people back to work by addressing health issues, and also with the services that local government provides, both in terms of social care, but also in other areas like libraries and community centres.
Absolutely. I think we've got a piece of work that is the next phase of what is a strategic planning tool that estates use called SHAPE, and the next reiteration is SHAPE Atlas, that it's going to bring more data together from acute community services, etc. We obviously invite local authority representatives to each of the place strategic estates groups, so there is that sort of two-way conversation, but absolutely yes, we do encourage other voluntary sectors as well. I was at a meeting yesterday where they were suggesting that one of the most important sort of links to assist with primary care was inviting citizens' advice into GP practices to sort of offer further clarification. Those people are in need of health, but obviously sometimes having an example like citizens' advice there as well. So we are sort of exploring all of those options.
James. Ruth?
Thank you. I won't echo the great points that have been made, but really strongly welcome the idea that we have a concerted look at the whole public infrastructure in neighbourhoods. But also have an eye on productivity as part of that, so that we actually create more efficient services, and specifically also that we design with the users in mind, involved, hardwired through the process. I'm sure it's there, but just to emphasise that we must design services that work for all sectors of our communities. I had two specific questions. You mentioned LiftCo and that some were expiring within the next 6 years. We've also got PFI schemes, large PFI schemes, that must be coming to some sort of conclusion soon. So can you, over the lifetime of this strategy, what is the capital and revenue impact of all of those schemes coming to fruition, and how do we deal with that? And then my second question is, where does the capital for major equipment come from? And I mean things like the robots, the scanners. Is that a completely separate process, or is it part of our infrastructure? Because we've got digital and buildings, but we also have other big capital requirements as well, don't we? And I just didn't understand where that fitted in. Thank you.
I think the product
Just Ruth, that really two important big questions. We're running out of time, I think, to do some of this justice. Just give us some headlines, Claire, because I'm going to push.
Okay, so just wanted to say, because there's some really, really excellent points that have been made in the conversation today, and things, and you won't be surprised to know that we have also grappled with amongst the executive team as well, particularly around the one public estate, the local authority integration with their asset base, etc. And your point, Ruth, and Raj has also made the point on productivity. So we're seeing this document as iteration number 1. And for submission to support an NHS England requirement which has a specific scope in terms of what it's asked for. And you know, there will be and there will need to be a huge amount of work now to develop the implementation plan, but also move us into the next iteration of the strategy, which will incorporate some of the things we talked about today. Specifically on productivity, I think feedback we've had since circulating the papers from the chairman and from others is that the point on productivity isn't strong enough in the way that it comes out of this document. We've described it as financial sustainability as an underpinning principle, but I think we need to go further than that. So one of the things I will commit to do is making some adjustments to that if we're happy with the rest of the strategy, to do some edits on that and before we submit it and run that past the chairman before we do. But in answer to your specific questions on the PFI and the equipment and all of that, I mean, we don't have a capital and revenue plan extending to that would be part of the implementation plan. So the strategy we haven't yet done the implementation plan that says what is the implications of we know when the PFIs will end, but we haven't done the fully worked up financial analysis that identifies when and how that is replaced. We're expecting multi-year capital allocations in the spring as well, which will support some of the work we're doing. So this is an ambitious strategy. It's not costed at this stage. We've got to have that work still to do. But we think that it's a starting point of baselining, really. And we need to be ambitious because as the government policy is evolving, we want to take every opportunity for the capital opportunities that gives us to be ready for what we want to do and where our priorities are.
Thanks, Claire. I'm going to this is here for approval. I'm going to suggest we make some changes. We need to be able to submit a document to NHSE and with the caveat of having a stronger section on how it's going to drive productivity. And if people are comfortable, once I'm happy with that, we'll allow that submission to happen. But the document needs to, it's misleading to call it a strategy at this moment in time. I think it's a work in progress document that's a supplementary piece of paper, isn't it? That's going to produce, not piece of paper, that describe a load of work. That's going to produce, in the end, our strategy that will be, you know, patient and service and citizen-centric. The one public place, huge driver for us, it must be in the productivity piece. Really importantly, in terms of some of our statutory objectives about social value, how are we going to use this initiative to drive social value? So it's a great start. And James, thank you for what this is a phenomenal piece of work, so thank you for that. But I'm going to suggest for our own records, we call it something other than the strategy, and let's change the title, but submit whatever you need to submit to keep our NHS England people happy, people comfortable with that position. Just one final thing for me. I think it's important for this board to see that piece of governance arrangement in terms of how the strategic estates group, who's going to chair it, what its reporting arrangement. We need to get that really right to be able to achieve some of the aims I think we've articulated. So if we could bring that back reasonably soon. Yep. People happy to move on? Thank you. Should we go to young people's elective wage recovery?
Great, thank you, Chairman. So a paper in front of the board to consider a proposition around an ambitious timeline to reduce long waits for children and young people and a return to the NHS constitutional standards around 18 weeks by no later than September 25. I think the paper in itself is pretty explanatory in the sense that, you know, we all recognise that long waits for children can have a significant consequence in terms of their development. And therefore, looking at the current position that we have across Cheshire and Mersey, where at least 1,400 patients of a young age are waiting in excess of 52 weeks. That's made up approximately half on secondary care waiting lists, with the other half on the tertiary centre of Alder Hay. And based upon current throughput of activity, whilst I still believe that we'd be able to achieve the constitutional standard ahead of the time frame that was in the government's manifesto, it still probably looks at a timescale for resolution by approximately March 27. So CMAS do have to have the credit for working up the engagement, working with the providers to understand what is the art of the possible, have developed a proposal around a timeline which would see us being able to return to constitutional standards no later than September 25. There's probably 2 stages within that. I would suggest we can probably eliminate the waits in the secondary care providers by spring of 25, with the elimination across the tertiary centre on that September timescale. To put it into context, we're currently already performing about 10% more work beyond core hours to get the progress that we're already seeing to date. This would mean a further 10 to 20% dependent on the provider over the course of the next 12 months. It would probably equate to potentially £4 million worth of additional cost to the system, but that would be recovered as part of the ERF arrangements that are currently in place. As long as we can provide that activity, obviously within tariff, is the key thing. But we do know that there are some productivity and efficiency improvements that could be achieved in some of the units, particularly around paediatrics, and therefore CMAS will deploy the expertise they have in that field around theatre productivity, as well as some of the national support teams in that direction. So it's a proposal that we would like to see has no negative financial consequence overall, but will clearly have a very welcome patient impact on this timescale. So if it's acceptable to the board, we will develop individual performance trajectories. We'll build that into the performance arrangements. We'll build it into board reporting so you can judge progress. But I'll leave it there and open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Anthony. Any questions or comments on this? Neil?
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with this, but against the context we've been talking, paragraph 10 of finance says it could require potential additional resource or reprioritising of existing resources. How is it going to be funded? Is it going to be cost neutral? I don't mind having a cost as long as we're consciously aware and we take a decision on the cost. But I'm not quite clear what that's telling me.
I mean, Claire may want to provide input on the ERF mechanics.
Claire?
Yeah, so my microphone, I think is... there we go. So, yeah, the way that the elective recovery fund mechanism works is that as a system, our funding is directly related to the level of elective activity work that we do. So, and that's specifically built that way to avoid those difficult decisions that you're sort of describing there, in that the more elective work we do, the more funding we get from NHS England. So if there is investment needed at the margin to incrementally increase our capacity, provided that is done within tariff, it would not worsen our financial position. In fact, in the majority of cases, increasing our elective activity, even if there is a step change in our cost, generally you can do it for less than 100% of tariff, and therefore it's generally adding to a contribution to the financial position. It's neutral at worst. It could actually improve depending on the incremental costs.
Thanks. Hilary?
Yeah, I want to go back to looked after children and whether there'll be a priority group within this. And I noticed that the cut-off age is 18. And could we consider for care leavers whether we extend that age to 25?
Okay. Yeah, we can certainly go away. We haven't applied that nuance to this analysis as you suggested, but we can certainly go away and refine that proposal. Okay.
Thank you. So as I said earlier in the meeting, I am the Children and Young Persons Champion for this board. And I'd like us to look at this again and be more ambitious about how we reduce those long waits for our children, and of course meeting the constitutional standard which is interpreted by us at 92% at 18 weeks. And it's, to me, it's pretty emotional. A child who's 5 waiting a year, that has a significant long length of time, and it can potentially have a really significant impact on the child's outcome for many, many years to come. I've heard very clearly, Anthony, this is a capacity issue, and we're already stretching capacity by 10%, and this would take it to 20% capacity for a period of time, I guess, until you get to steady state. But could I seek the board's support for us to look at this again to see how much further, faster we can go? And if need be, we need to have those conversations with Alder Hay in particular, where the vast bulk of the longer waits are, I think is what I've understood.
Yeah, we'll certainly take that away. Yeah.
Is that okay? We'll bring this back next time. Yep, okay, thank you. Should we... The annual business plan for approval, Claire?
Thank you. I'm going to invite Stephen Woods, our Head of Strategy, to sort of briefly present the plan and next steps, as he's led most of the work, so I think that's only fair, but I'll just introduce it very briefly if that's okay. So the ICB's annual business plan sort of collates and provides details of the delivery plans from our key organisational documents, namely the 24-29 joint forward plan, including the NHS delivery plan, which I presented at our July meeting, our operational, finance and workforce plans. It reflects and acknowledges the healthcare partnership plan and priorities, which we're hoping to sign off next Tuesday, the 1st of October. So the annual plan describes what we need to do to deliver and meet local and national priorities and responsibilities of the ICB. Importantly, it also provides assurance on how the ICB will meet its requirements under the NHS Oversight and Assessment Framework. We know there's a new framework due out soon. Obviously, it was paused during the election period, but we know it's due out soon for publication. So I suggest that myself and Anthony maybe bring back further information about that to the next meeting or the next but one, whenever we know a bit more. But if it's okay, I'll hand over to Stephen, who will just present a short outline of the plan and how we got there and next steps. Thank you.
Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Claire. As Claire's already pointed out, the document, just in terms of citing it, we've got the overarching altogether for our health and care partnership plan, which, as Claire's pointed out, is going for approval next week on the 1st of October. Underneath that, we've got the joint forward plan and more specifically the NHS delivery plan element. What this document does is focus down on those areas that the ICB has got direct responsibility for. It picks up some of those items that Anthony described that are already in the integrated performance report, but it also includes some of the key areas that we've got in our 2024-25 recovery programme as well. So it amalgamates them into one document. As Claire's already pointed out as well, it also then cross-references back to the NHS operating plan and the key areas that are in there. And if you look at Appendix 2, which is right at the back, those areas are described. How it's built around the 4 strategic objectives of an ICS, which are the 4 strategic objectives that we have adopted as an ICB as well, and those are the 4 core ones that are described in all the core documents. So those are around improving outcomes in population health and healthcare, tackling health inequalities in outcomes, experience and access, enhancing productivity and value for money, and helping the NHS support social and economic development. So the actual table that's at the back of the document is built around those 4 core purposes. And basically what the table does, it identifies what is the actual area of development. So if you look at the first page, for instance, it's talking about quality and patient safety. It identifies a number of key objectives that then relate to that area. But then the important bits for 24-25, it outlines what our planned ambition is against each of those. It then goes on to, wherever possible, identify a quarterly trajectory so that we've got an idea against the targets that we've set in relation to the current baselines, where we need to be across each of the 4 quarters. For some of them, it doesn't provide a trajectory in that way. It provides a narrative, and those narratives tend to indicate the progress of an individual piece of work. So two examples will be the children and young people's ones in there, where we've still got work developing around that. So what we've done is we've described the process and where we expect to be by the end of quarter 4. It identifies the exec lead. Most of those people are here around the table today. It also cross-references against the board assurance framework, so it looks at the risks that are in there and there's a cross-reference to those. There's also an additional cross-reference to the corporate risks. We felt that was useful to identify that. And then on top of that, it identifies the reporting route, or the current reporting route. Some of these are still up for review and discussion. And then finally, it identifies what's the driver, whether that's the NHS operating framework, the current long-term plan, or whether, as I said, it relates directly back to our current recovery programmes. So in a nutshell, that's what the document does. I suppose it's the table at the back that's probably more interest to the board, because I think that's the thing we're suggesting that we will use to monitor the ongoing progress against each of the items that have been identified. In terms of its development, we have worked with each of the leads for all the particular areas, and we've been out for some expert advice on that. It's been through the corporate execs, and we've had some separate meetings with Graham, Raj and Claire in relation to forming the document in the background. Sounds like it was simple. It wasn't. There's a lot of work's gone into agreeing certainly what those trajectories are, and that's been a bit of a backwards and forwards, and a nice example will be the dental one, to try and get us to something that we were confident was the right thing to be monitoring.
Thanks, Stephen. And thank you for all the work that you and your team have put into this. Both complicated, and there's been many different views, haven't there, on what this document's about. And I think where we've landed, Claire, is it's really an internal document to enable us as a board to understand what we're trying to deliver. That's the real focus of this document, rather than an outward-facing communication to the public. And I think it fulfills a really important gap that was in our assurance. It enables us as the board to see what we've agreed to deliver in one place. See it in one place, and it will in future inform the performance report. And it also allows us to see what we thought was happening isn't happening, or in terms of specific goals and that type of stuff. We can debate this a long time, but I think it's a really good document. It's got to a good stage. It will evolve over time, and hopefully in future years we'll get it sooner in September, now that we've got this as a template.
Yep, yeah. Thank you. I think it's well. Thank you to Stephen, Neil, and others who've been involved in this. It is absolutely that. It pulls together all the sort of activity and delivery plans for all of the big sort of ICB documents. But I think if we're going to try and get ahead of the curve for next year, I guess we need to do that with sort of all of our sort of planning work, don't we? And I guess it's just how we all sort of collectively join up. But I think this is an important document to hold everything in one place.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks.
So it's here for approval. People happy to approve it? Thank you. Ian. Last, but this will have time.
Right, I recognise the time, so we'll jump straight into it.
No, I'm saying this will have time to explore it properly.
Okay.
Don't speak yet.
Okay, brilliant, well, fantastic. Thank you. So, in your packs, you'll have quite a bit of a detailed report. In the past, we've brought updates on population health, but we just wanted to share some slides as well to talk you through some of the key highlights of the programme. Our approach to population health, we heard at the AGM, and also we'd through the strategy just before, and looked at 4 domains, if you like, or pillars is what we called them. Pillar 1 is altogether fairer, the social determinants of health. Very much primary prevention, getting upstream, tackling the causes of ill health. And we can't do that in isolation as an ICB. We do that very much with our partners, local authority, community sector, business sectors as well, around that as well. So that captures in Pillar 1. We'll just show a couple of examples of that in the slides in action. Pillar 2 is very much about supporting those healthier behaviours, and we have a duty to provide a number of different types of services to help reduce the harms from alcohol and tackle smoking and promoting a healthy weight. Again, we don't do that in isolation. We've got our NHS providers here, local community trusts providing that work as well as the third sector. The third pillar is around healthcare inequalities and what we can be doing primarily around secondary prevention work and what's called NHS Core 20+5. Most of the board should be familiar with all of that, both across children and adults. but in that is specifically some work around CVD prevention, which still drives biggest gap in life expectancy as well. And finally, one of the best things we can be doing as well is promoting primary prevention with immunisation programmes. We've heard some more earlier today, but also screening programmes as well. And we started off with the targeted lung health checks as well, which will become a new national screening programme. Prevention is the way for us to be able to help reduce the demand on our health services moving forward, to make things sustainable. And we have to invest in that as a group, as a collective, and make sure we embed the right things in how we do that, and that will take some time to do. Most of the benefits we've seen from national government policies, such as the smoking ban, alcohol strategies, the new vaping ban have come through. We've had major changes in helping improve population health, thinking about our immunisation programmes as well. Not all have landed. You know, so since 1992, every government has identified obesity as a major health issue, and you know, things haven't quite changed the tides on that. But we do have an opportunity now as we shape the 10-year plan that we heard about the AGM being shaped. In paragraph 4.9 of page 347 in your papers, you'll see a bit of a national emergent thinking around the health missions. Hopefully you'll be able to see in that essentially the role of primary prevention, the work of central and local government in primary prevention, but our work of NHS and secondary prevention is entwined within that. And essentially it's our altogether fairer strategy and plan that Stephen and Claire have just presented to the board, really close alignment with what we want to be achieving, tackling smoking, eliminating smoking, reducing the harms of alcohol, tackling obesity. There's also elements in there around air pollution and thinking about the sustainability agenda in the estates conversation we just had as well. Moving forward, we have to do that collectively, and our approaches around system leadership has been doing things in partnership. So I've just drawn a couple of examples on there. I think at the last board we had some of the good work that our providers and CMAS have been doing around using data to tackle health inequalities on waiting lists and getting people into the right services and prehabilitation. We have established a Population Health Alliance, which brings together all our NHS and wider local authority staff as part of a network of peer support in getting prevention and promotion in place. Our CHAMPS Collaborative, which is working with our 9 local authorities, it's a unique relationship that we've got, something that we should be really cherished and proud of. It established 21 years ago, and we're unique in being able to invest in that programme and having a joined-up team in that. So we have one unified voice in promoting prevention and working together with our local authority colleagues in that space. Joined today by obviously our Ellen as well, and Warren from the third sector. They just won a prestigious award with our Cancer Alliance. Some of the work, for example, in Kirby, the Soul Sisters work, reaching into our communities about how you can engage around early detection and screening, really, really important. Again, it shows the role that we all have to play in doing this together and collectively. Doesn't quite work on these small screens, and I know I'm on a time limit, but data interaction has been referenced a couple of times, but it is crucial. We've established a Population Health Academy, and that's working with our colleagues at the Innovation Agency, something we're quite proud about what we've been able to do. A number of cohorts going through that. We've established an accredited programme within that about how we use those tools to make a big difference. So Rowan, you head up before at the AGM, talk about how we've reached out to 10,000 patients who've been misstratified to get up more upstream. We've been able to increase the numbers of about 800 people more going into telehealth, which we know when risk stratified can reduce admissions by 25%. We know that we can share the information with our integrated care teams that can proactively target patients who might be more susceptible for admissions to hospital as well. And we're starting to see information feed through from that. So, for example, people on the diabetic waiting list in Wirral, over 180 people then be referred into prehabilitation services more proactively too. So we've also, one of the things I'm quite glad about is about our joined up approach to data. We have got 150 analysts from not just the NHS, local authority, housing, fire, police coming together with the universities as part of the development programme there as well. So these are all things that we've been able to achieve in the last 12 months by working together. We referenced the child poverty agenda earlier on. This is significant with regards to the priorities of the healthcare partnership, but also we heard about that at our own ICB Children's Committee, that we've got 100,000 families living in poverty in our patch, which just causes us all sorts of challenges. That work has actually been able to use as an advocacy piece with the new government and offering to share the work from that with the new Labour government about their new child poverty task force and the strategy that's due next year. So that advocacy piece, working together, and the size of our system plays an important part in embedding prevention. The Prevention Pledge, all of our trusts are signed up to that, but we have to keep on going with that, making sure that our workforce and our patients who are going into our trusts get healthier support and environments within that. This is in the Pillar 2 programmes. I'm just going to draw 2 quick things out. The Altogether Smoke-Free ambitions, again, massive driver of inequality. You'll see the savings that could be done through eliminating smoking there on the screen. That's something we've worked together with our 9 local authority partners, bringing together the NHS services in our trusts, but also the community specialist smoking services, and a big plan for us over the next 3 years to eliminate that smoking and maximise the opportunity from the tobacco vape bill that's coming through. An example in practice is around the healthy advertising, getting upstream around healthy weight. Knowsley Council have led this, but with the work of our local authorities have been able to share learning and share approaches about restrictions on advertising policies, taking the learning that's been done in the Transport for London and in London and savings that can be made there as well. And that comes back full circle to the reasons why we're focusing on smoke-free and a healthy weight agenda as our at-scale programmes. 2 quick ones, just to show the importance of the work that goes into our trusts as well. The Cancer Alliance have done some fantastic training on health inequalities aimed at cancer patients. It's a validated tool that has been in place, something I think we should be able to roll out across all our areas. It's a 60 to 90 minute programme. I'd like to draw the attention to the board and others to that, because why would we do things in isolation when they've seen really good uptake in health inequalities based on local providers and local workers within that space. CVD prevention, if we can prevent over 1,500 heart attacks, you can see the multi-million pounds that we can save the ICS over a 3-year period. We receive reports to the board about the uptake in managing hypertension. It will remain a national priority, but we have to work with our colleagues in local authority about who are responsible for the mandation of NHS health checks, our primary care, and be able to deliver them, but also identifying people using the data, as said before. And I'm nearly done. I am at a canter. Pressing the wrong buttons. We heard at the start of the journey about targeted lung health checks. We're about to go into Stoptober, and the link between lung cancer and smoking is well established. But actually, through that work for the targeted lung health checks, we found that 10% of the people coming through there had higher risk markers for CVD as well. So not a surprise for us around the table, but does show the importance of it being the outreach of that and what you can do with that work. Myself and the chair, Raj, actually visited the Live Well service in Aintree just last week. Something really, really positive they've been able to evolve from just delivering COVID vaccines into our more rural communities. There's 3 buses now going out to some of our more communities we've been harder to engage with, might not have the physical assets there in place, but we've been able to introduce cervical smears as well into that space as well. We nearly had 250 smears in just the last 3 months come through. So you can see the opportunities about being able to take services to people that can get access to that and make difference to the benefits they're doing. I'm going to just sum up now. Thank you for letting us go through that, albeit a bit of a canter. One of the things I'd ask the board is it's quite a broad amount of work, population health, and whether or not in the future we want to bring back more of a focused area. I'll just leave that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Other questions or comments? Ruth?
Thank you. Well, first of all, just a huge congratulations to Ian and the very small team that you have. Massive achievement, and just reflecting the time it takes to be that collaborative and to work in partnership across a huge area of Cheshire and Merseyside. There's no doubt there's strong peer support in the public health world for the work that Ian's leading. So, that's the first thing to say, is this is incredibly broad and impacting so many different things. I guess looking forward, though, and the scale of the inequality challenge that we have and the poor health that we have here, as part of our financial recovery, forward planning for our strategy, how much impact can we have? What's it going to take to really turn the dial? Life expectancy has deteriorated, but we know in the late 2000s it was actually the gap was narrowing, and there was a really strong focus on cardiovascular disease. I mean, every element of it was under scrutiny and action. So I guess what Ian might be hinting towards is, are there some things that we really need to go at as part of our strategy to really show that we can make an impact? Because we need measurable change here. And the relationships and the partnerships will help in all of that. But do we as a strategic body need to sort of pick some areas and really invest and go after them, would be my question. And then finally, vaccination and screening is coming our way and will be delegated. And I'm really pleased that Ian's connected with the regional system in the lead up to that, but they're huge programs of work, and we must make sure that we're ready and equipped, and that what we inherit is as good as it can be before we take that on as well, because these are huge areas that need improvement. But thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Claire?
Thank you. Yeah, just, I suppose, thank you to Ian, the team, but also thanks to Directors of Public Health across the local authorities, CHAMPS, and all the wider partners engaged in this. I'm just going to answer, if that's okay, on behalf of Ian, your last point, Ruth, first. We have received delegated services from NHS England for a number of services, community pharmacy first, then dental optometry, specialised services. We're due another 29 specialised services in April, and sort of the screening immunisations will hopefully come in April 25. Each time we have done a very rigorous due diligence in terms of sender-receiver. So we've worked with NHS England well in advance of receiving the services so that we know what we're getting, and we try and put them in as good a place as possible before we take them on. So there's a huge governance piece as well as a sort of a service due diligence improvement before we take them on. So I can assure you on behalf of Ian and the team who'll be leading that we'll do exactly the same, and we're quite well sort of seasoned in that now. So hopefully we can do that. I just think in terms of this work, the ICB has 4 strategic priorities, and sort of population health, health inequalities touches all of them. It's not just the 2 around inequalities and population health. It's absolutely about, sort of the impact the ICB makes on society and the economy, and obviously the finance as well. So I think it's really important that we hear this here, as well as it being sort of through the HCP, which is probably its sort of key committee for receiving this, but it's really, really important that this agenda is sort of fits right through all the work we do. In terms of that scale, I think you're right, and I know Ian's really sort of keen on this. Smoke-free, that's our #1 priority sort of for the coming years, but obviously CVD as well, and we've already raised an issue about that in terms of sort of strategy and transformation and recurrent funding. So I think we've chosen the right areas as our starter, but I think sometimes, and I know Raj challenges me on this all the time in terms of prioritise the priorities. We've got to get, I agree, hone down on 1 or 2 really big issues, but I think loads of fantastic work since you've been appointed in, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. So, Ian, really good paper, great presentation. I'm going to suggest to the board that we see a population health State of the Nation type of report twice a year. Does that feel the right sort of frequency? It's really important that we keep track of this and to support understanding those few things that we're going to do, to articulate and in future annual plans, put in what's the contribution of the ICB to the delivery of those population health ambitions. And as we sit here at the end of the meeting, and we've talked an awful lot about finance. If we don't do some of this work, we'll be talking about finance in the same way in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, in 20 years' time. But we know we can do things about it, and Ruth made given us an example about what we used to do around CVD, which makes a difference. So, great work, Ian. Thank you very much. Nearly there. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can I take those as accurate and therefore seek your approval for them? Yep, thank you. The action log, if memory serves me right, there was only one outstanding one to consider. That's right, the right care, right place. Outstanding. It's not you're the nominated person, Graham. It just says it's ongoing, but no end date.
Okay, we'll come back and clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Good meeting, thank you. Sorry it's taken us way past time. Just somebody remind when we're supposed to start the next board?